Chapter 981. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. His steel-like body shuttled through the crowd. Although he didn't hurt anyone, he was like a ghost, causing fear in the crowd. They threw all kinds of attacks to the side, but they couldn't hit anything. In a state of panic, they could only continuously attack their surroundings. At the same time, he had to endure attacks from all directions. He didn't know who was attacking him. These people were half crazy, but this was only temporary. Situ Hua saw a familiar figure among them. It was the pain of being hunted for half a year. Plus, there was the blood feud between them. He almost couldn't help but rush over and fight to the death. However, at the last moment, Xuelan swung her arm and sent him flying back through the air. You'll only be courting death if you rush over now. You can't even defeat the spirits of the sect, let alone Situ Sheng, who's pretty strong. Xuelan's tone was calm, without any prejudice. She didn't even have a trace of emotion, as if she was stating a fact. Everything that came out of her mouth had the power to convince people. She only spoke the truth. Situ Hua obviously didn't want to rush over to die, so he quickly hid behind them. But seeing his old enemy in such a sorry state, he felt very happy. After all, Situ Sheng was stronger, so he quickly calmed down. He even dared to kill his own brother. In order to get rid of his enemies, his hands were stained with the lives of many of his family members. He calmed down quickly. When he was clear-headed, he felt that everything in front of him was deliberately mystifying. Otherwise, why would there be such a huge change after their arrival when everything had been fine before? This valley had always been peaceful and quiet. Countless people came here to catch low-level immortal beasts or to dig up some ordinary spiritual herbs. Although the products here were extremely rich, the products produced were all of relatively low value, so it didn't attract much attention. This place had been peaceful for so long, so how could such a big thing happen all of a sudden and so many strange things happen? He could only think of someone deliberately mystifying and targeting him. Everything he did before must have been seen, so they set up such a trap. Ruthlessness flashed in Situ Sheng's eyes. Don't let him know who did it. Otherwise, he would definitely cut that person's entire family into pieces to relieve the hatred in his heart. The people inside come out. I know he must be hiding there. Although I, Situ Sheng, am cruel and merciless, I still have a bottom line. If it wasn't for someone blocking my way, I wouldn't have killed him. Now that I'm not as good as you, why don't you take the initiative to stand up and have an honest talk? Even if you want to fight me to the death, you should at least let me know the reason before I die. Xian Tian Shenzhen watched happily from the side. Sure enough, the world was big and full of wonders. He had seen many people like Situ Sheng in the past. If one really wanted to talk about it, he could be called an ambitious and ruthless character. After all, it was rare in the world for someone to be so ruthless to himself and his enemies, and to not be afraid of him at all. Most people like him were hypocrites. He was so open about how ruthless he was, yet he was still able to shamelessly say that he had a bottom line. Such a strange person really made people laugh. Several people walked out one after another. Situ Sheng, however, immediately notices Qin Yu, who is walking at the very front. His extremely sharp intuition told him that among these people, this young man had the most right to speak. Moreover, he sensed danger from him. Then he noticed the beautiful Xuelan, and a trace of shock flashed through his eyes. He had never seen such a beauty before. If it was another occasion, perhaps even he would have fallen for her. Unfortunately, he was too rational and knew that he was in a dangerous situation. So, he only admired her and didn't have any other thoughts. But he didn't know that if he really had any other thoughts, he would definitely die on the spot. Xian Tian Shenzhen's strength had reached the highest level, and his control of his own strength had reached the peak. If he didn't want others to see that he was extremely strong, unless it was someone who was almost at the same level as him, it was impossible to see how strong he was. So, Situ Sheng directly glanced over. He felt that this old man was old and his strength wasn't very outstanding, so he put him aside for the time being. His gaze landed on the last person, and he suddenly laughed. I was wondering who it was that wanted to scheme against me, but I didn't expect it to be a good-for-nothing like you. It turns out that I've underestimated you all these years to be able to find help. But how can these strangers from the outside compare to your own family? Why don't you quickly come to Uncle's side? Although there were some misunderstandings between you and me, they were just misunderstandings, weren't they? Situ Hua's hands, which were hanging by his side, clenched tightly. He ground his teeth, wishing he could swallow this guy and eat his flesh raw. How could he have a nerve to say such things? He should be the clearest about the things he had done. Ever since they walked out, the countless spirits above the valley gate had all returned. Even the faintly discernible mist had completely disappeared without a trace. Although many people were injured, the number of survivors was not in the minority. Looking at his subordinates, who had regained their consciousness and gathered together, Sidu Sheng was even more certain of his guess. Just now, they must have done something behind his back. Otherwise, how could there be such a coincidence? He wanted to test it out, and his eyes turned slightly in his eye sockets. Nephew, Uncle has a piece of news. I heard that there is a peerless divine weapon in the depths of the valley. If you get it, you could dominate the world and be proud of your strength. That magical weapon even hides the secret of reaching the true God realm. After all, there's an unbreakable blood relationship between me and the people. Why don't you and I work together? We can't let these outsiders take advantage of us. Just as he was about to proudly tell him that the divine weapon had been taken away, suddenly, Sidu Hua felt that something was wrong. How could this old fox not see that they had just walked out of the valley? Saying such words at this time, who knew what he was thinking? He directly exposed the layer of disguise that he had made. If you want to know, just say it. Why do you have to hide it like this? Situ Sheng, who didn't succeed, was slightly unhappy. This brat had actually become smarter without him knowing. Fight to the side, you useless trash. You are not qualified to inherit the position of the head of the family. This position should be occupied by the capable. Chapter 982. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. As soon as he finished speaking, he took out his pair of baleful axes. Each of them weighed at least 500 kilograms. However, they were like a pair of toys in his hands that he could manipulate freely. The pair of axes that were filled with baleful aura slashed toward him and even split the air apart. In the blink of an eye, they passed through the air and arrived in front of Qinyu. Qinyu flicked his finger. He used a special technique to temporarily restore the dominating Heaven Blade's power. He had already received the complete inheritance and could restore the dominating Heaven Blade at any time. He only needed a few key materials to create a spirit that truly recognized him as its master. To temporarily restore the dominating Heaven Blade's true power, he could do it with just a flick of his finger. When the two collided, the tyrannical dominating Heaven Blade directly split the pair of incomparably sharp axes in half. Qinyu's eyes lit up. Dominating Heaven Blade, dominating Heaven Blade. It really lives up to its name. Under the dominating Heaven Blade, no weapon can compete with it. Situ Sheng watched as his beloved axes were destroyed so easily. He did not have time to feel heartache as his eyes landed on the overbearing saber. It looked broad and was filled with baleful aura. Moreover, it suited him very well. Moreover, it possessed such sharp and powerful strength. He could feel the overbearing aura from afar. Only such a divine weapon could be considered a divine weapon. This was what he wanted the most. As expected, the divine weapon has been taken by you. As expected, I'm still a step too late. However, I'm curious. I used the entire Sidu family's power and finally found this place. Where did you get the news from? Although he looked calm on the surface, the intention to snatch the divine weapon had long risen in his heart. If it was not for the extremely sharp saber that had left a deep impression on him, he would not have dared to do so. At this moment, he did not care about his reputation and directly used force. Since he had already obtained the position of the family head, the entire Sidu family was under his control. Even if he really tried to snatch the divine weapon, as long as he won, no one would dare to say anything to him. Although the overbearing power had already split the pair of powerful axes, it still continued to revolve around him. Even Qin Yu's state of mind had undergone some subtle changes. It was as if the enemies in front of him could be easily suppressed. There was no need to listen to him blabbering on and on about this nonsense. Let me ask you, did you kill Situ Hua's father? Let me ask you, are you willing to do anything for this power, killing countless people? Let me ask you, the one who has been sending people to kill Situ Hua, the one who spared no expense to hunt him down and kill him, the one who wants to see him dead or alive, is it you? The sudden appearance of these three questions caught Situ Sheng off guard, but then he admitted it. So what if it was him? Now, everyone here was his trusted aide. Even if he found out, he would still get rid of all of them, not leaving a single one alive. Thus, he didn't have to worry about being overheard. All of these were done by him, and he had done more than that. She heard the three questions that were asked one after another. The wariness in Situ Sheng's heart lessened slightly. Although he was still extremely fearful, at least he could say a few words, so he still had a chance. He even hoped that this kind of nonsense, which didn't have much meaning to him, could be asked a few more questions. He would definitely confess. Then he could use this opportunity to slowly move forward until he reached his goal. The closer he was, the easier it would be to make a move. Xuelan saw his fingers move slightly under his robe. Suddenly, she grasped the ribbon at her waist. This ribbon could be turned into a soft sword at any time under her will, cutting the enemy's throat. But Xian Tian Shenzhen, who was beside her, shook his head slightly. His disciple might not have not seen it. Since Qin Yu had his own plans and ideas, there was no need for them to interfere. It was enough to stand at the side and watch from afar. Moreover, with Situ Sheng's strength, there was no way he could do anything under his nose. Even if the situation was so bad that the other party sacrificed his life and used those forbidden techniques, he had the ability to stop it immediately. He was not afraid at all, even if a true god came. Why should he care about a clown who liked to jump around? Wasn't it better to watch the show? Situ Sheng confessed to all the crimes that he had committed. In order to cultivate this group of subordinates, he even destroyed many families. After getting rid of their biological parents, they adopted them as their subordinates in the name of being orphans. When they grew up, they became loyal to him alone. If he told them to go east, they would never go west. If he told them to commit suicide, no one would live alone. He was the leader, and he was the sky. Aren't you afraid that they might rebel at any time? Qin Yu says as he looks at the restless subordinates behind Situ Sheng, who were clamoring nonstop. Rebel? Ha ha ha. It was as if they had heard a joke. Situ Sheng laughed until tears came out of his eyes. I poison all of them, and they have to take the antidote every month. Of course, no one knows about this. Only I know about this. I will often send them some supplements, saying that it can improve their physical fitness and even their talent. They just need to take it at a fixed time every month. Otherwise, all their previous efforts will be wasted, so they obediently believed it. As long as I want, they will live a life worse than death at any time. Why should I care about what they think of me? The most loyal subordinates of Situ Sheng were so angry that their eyes were red. They were the most talented and had the most complicated identities. The Wind Realm was so big. Who would care about the occasional destruction of a few clans and the loss of a few talented babies? They could find any excuse and reason, and not many people would doubt it. The ones with the most outstanding talent usually had an impressive background, but now they were all being controlled. They had even done so much for the sake of the enemy, who had exterminated their entire clan. Most of them were a loss. They did not understand how things became like this. They did not know if they should listen to Situ Sheng's orders. Only a small group of people had some understanding of Situ Sheng. They were all trusted subordinates and were extremely smart. Now that Situ Sheng could say such words in front of them, it also meant that Situ Sheng did not think of letting them go safely. He was going to kill them to silence them. Suddenly, someone walked out and put down his weapon. I am willing to be a witness and pull him down from the position of family head. and I have more evidence of his crimes in my hands. I could take all of it out. I just want him to lose his reputation and live a life worse than death. Chapter 983. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Someone exposed all of Situ Shung's evil deeds. More and more people came forward. Furthermore, he revealed everything that he knew about it. Situ Shung had asked his men to do some things behind everyone's back. So when everyone told him about the missions they had carried out, the secret things they had done, they looked at each other in disbelief. It turned out that Situ Shung had done so many things without them knowing. It was a pity that they didn't know anything. They even thought that they already knew more than half of it. He is indeed ruthless and vicious. Situ Shung's face was gloomy, even though there was no one else here. However, being exposed, all of a sudden, his mood was still extremely gloomy. He grabbed the person closest to him and broke his neck with a wave of his hand. He threw the limp body aside, and a blood-red color flashed in his eyes. He was going to start a massacre, and this time, no one could stop him. Those who were familiar with him quickly understood this. Whether they were smart or stupid, they all fled in all directions. Only a few smart ones, who were the first to understand all this. They immediately ran in the direction of Chinyu. They looked powerful. If they could be protected, they would be safe and secure. Otherwise, on the contrary, they who had betrayed Situ Shung would definitely become a thorn in Situ Shung's flesh. This vicious and merciless guy definitely wouldn't mind taking more lives and blood on his hands. But why would Chinyu help these people? While he was thinking, Situ Shung had already killed the people around him. Some of these people were close to him. Some of them were good helpers who had done many secret things for him. But now that he was going to start a massacre, no one would be able to escape unscathed from his hands. Those who were closest to him were all dead. This time, he had brought out more than 100 people, and nearly 100 of them had died. The remaining few didn't have a good time either. They didn't just stand there in a daze with tears streaming down their faces. They just ran away in a panic. Needless to say, those who were still in a daze had their necks cut cleanly, cutting off all signs of life. As for those who were slightly smarter, there were still 2 who managed to escape. He stood beside Situ Hua. We have done something wrong in the past. From now on, we are willing to change our faces and pay any price to atone for our sins. That's right. This evil demon deserves to die in everyone's hands. A scum like him doesn't deserve to live in this world. Situ Hua was at a loss. After all, he could not control the fate of these people. These people were a burden and trouble to him. To him, he already needed the help of others, let alone taking in these people. Even if he really took in these people, it would be a great help to him. However, he could not make such a decision easily. He could only look at Chinyu. He hoped that he could make an exception. If you want to keep them, then keep them. In any case, I won't let him kill anyone who stands on my side. Situ Shung suddenly laughed out loud. I don't believe that you can protect the people I want to kill so easily. Even if you have a divine weapon in your hand, so what? Since my identity is still there, I can take everything in your hands. With your strength, you can compete with me. Even I can't help but fear you. I'm not completely helpless against you. Suddenly, a few small wooden figurines appeared in his hand. Each of them was only the size of a finger. There were more than a dozen small wooden figurines in his palm. They were piled up messily. As he muttered to himself, these small wooden figurines suddenly emitted some faint light. Then he suddenly threw them into the air. Each of them shone brightly. Their size changed instantly. They became the size of an adult man. Each of them was extremely powerful. Although they were not as strong as Situ Shung, their strength could be considered extremely powerful. That was what he had in mind. It was impossible for him to not kill the people he wanted to kill. Now that there was really no other way, he might as well use other methods to stall them. The rest of the people killed all the traitors under their command. When the time came, he would be able to free up his hands to deal with this young man who suddenly appeared and gave him a great sense of threat. However, he completely ignored the few people beside him. Not to mention that Situ Hua, who did not have much ability, could temporarily stall a small wooden figurine. This was the greatest value he could bring to bear in this matter. The others were also extremely powerful. Among them, Xiantian Shenzhen was the most powerful. These small wooden figurines were just small toys in his eyes that could be smashed into sawdust with a flick of his finger. So one could imagine. These small wooden figurines were disorderly broken into pieces and piled up like a mountain. Situ Shang's movements were completely interrupted. I've already asked you to make a move several times, but you keep forcing me. I wanted to ask you what you chose. Now it seems that I don't need to give you a choice. Just kill without mercy and let you experience the feeling of being a cripple and being at the mercy of others. I think that would be more suitable for you. Situ Shang suddenly had a bad premonition in his heart. However, just as he had a bad premonition, the most terrifying thing happened. Qin Yu held the sky-dominating blade in his hand and felt the domineering and awe-inspiring intent. Suddenly, he simply waved his hand and slashed with the blade. Although it was simple and unadorned, it was extremely powerful. It was so powerful that it was impossible to dodge. Situ Shang's face was filled with shock, and he wanted to dodge. However, he found that this simple attack had sealed off all his escape routes. There was no place for him to retreat to. There was no way to escape and no way to dodge. He was already trapped in a dead end. Feeling the domineering intent coming at him, he felt the endless pain in his body. Situ Shang was still filled with disbelief. He was an ambitious and ruthless person, and all his ambitions had not yet begun. How did he suddenly fall into the hands of a young man who appeared out of nowhere? Although this young man's strength was extraordinary, he thought that his own strength was also extraordinary. However, everything in front of him made him feel a trace of despair. In the end, Qin Yu still showed some mercy and did not directly kill him on the spot. However, his meridians were broken, and he could only lie on the ground covered in blood. The red light in the sky had disappeared. Chapter 984. Situ Shang's body was covered in blood. At this moment, every inch of bone in his body was priceless. What shocked him the most was that he couldn't muster the slightest bit of strength in his body. He felt extremely weak. No, I will never become a cripple. This is an inner demon. This must be an illusion that you set up for me. I am Situ Shang, the current patriarch of the Situ clan. How could I become a cripple? He didn't want to believe that this was the truth, so he acted as if he had gone mad. Even Situ Hua couldn't help but feel a little pity for him. However, his heart was filled with hatred. Now, this answer scroll was enough for him to comfort his father's spirit in heaven. As for the rest, it was no longer important. Right now, his enemy was already in such a miserable state. Then, he could return to his father's grave and burn an incense stick in peace. However, he did not forget who had helped him do all this. He would not thank her for her kindness, because a weak and feeble thank you was not enough to express his gratitude. He was not worthy of such a huge favor. The only thing he could do now was to return to the Situ clan as soon as possible and take back everything that belonged to him. Furthermore, he had a hand over the payment that had already been agreed upon. Take out real resources and benefits. That was the best thing he could do now. Situ Shang, who had already become a cripple, had no power to resist. Even Situ Hua could easily lift someone up with one finger. It was as if he had casually pulled out a blade of grass. Holding it in his hand would not bring him any pressure at all. He could even toss someone thousands of miles away with a flick of his hand. She had already fallen into their hands. Under Situ Hua's suggestion, the group arrived at the main city as fast as they could. The so-called Pool of Wind. In the eyes of an expert, it was indeed like a toy. It was easily broken through. As soon as he barged into the Situ residence, he was surrounded by a group of people. They thought that there was an enemy. But when he saw the familiar face at the front, he couldn't help but be surprised. A small number of people who knew the inside story saw that Situ Hua had returned safely and easily barged in. They already had a bad feeling in their hearts. But then he saw Situ Shang, who was on the verge of death. Only then did they have no choice but to believe that the situation was hopeless. Whispers could be heard from the crowd. Now that Situ Sheng was the head of the family, he didn't have many achievements. However, his talent was peerless, and he was the younger brother of the previous patriarch. In a situation where his successor was missing, he had great strength. His ascension to the position of the clan head was perfectly justified. Therefore, no one doubted him. Now, he would see the heir who was rumored to have met with misfortune. All of a sudden, he came back clean and tidy. His strength had actually improved a little compared to before. His entire being was as dazzling as a sharpened blade, and he even brought back a young man with an even more extraordinary temperament. None of them were able to see through him. Most importantly, how did Situ Sheng end up in such a sorry state? He looked extremely miserable, as if he had been completely crippled. Then, they couldn't help but turn pale with fright when they probed. Just as they had thought, Situ Sheng had become a complete cripple. From then on, he would not be able to show any strength. He would not even be able to take the position of the clan head. Some people were happy, while others were sad. But on the surface, many people still looked concerned. What's going on? Could it be that you guys met some criminals? How did the clan head end up like this? Is someone preparing to attack our Situ family? Just say it. Our Situ clan is not a clan that anyone can offend as they wish. The noise in the crowd grew louder and louder like waves. Yu suddenly glanced at the crowd. Everyone felt that an extremely terrifying existence was staring at them. That feeling of terror only swept by and didn't linger for long. But it still made all of them stop. Everyone was extremely quiet. They didn't dare to make any noise. Situ Hua was a little envious. It would be great if he could have such a deterrent force. Unfortunately, for him, even if he could do it one day, it would be thousands or tens of thousands of years later, at least a few hundred years later. He might not be able to have Qin Yu's cultivation and strength. But then he knew that now was not the time to think about this. He cleared his throat in front of everyone and revealed everything he knew. He exposed Situ Sheng's true colors in front of everyone, although some people raised doubts, with the testimony of two of Situ Sheng's confidants. However, there were also quite a few people who believed it. Smart people naturally wouldn't be unknown. The smart ones saved their lives early and chose to stand on the side. And in the end, everything proved that their choice was right. Naturally, they were slightly famous. Some people recognized them, and naturally, some people knew that they were Situ Sheng's confidants. They were the kind of people who were extremely trusted and close to him. If there were any dirty things, they would do it in private. So in their hearts, they believed 70%. With the addition of all the evidence, he became somewhat convinced without a doubt. If that was the case, then Situ Sheng was an ingrate through and through. Because everyone knew that the previous head of the family was Situ Hua's father. What a wonderful person he was. Although he was not a great talent, he had a benevolent heart. He was very good to his brothers and treated everyone equally. Such a peerless good person was framed to death by such a villain. Very few people even discovered his true identity. Everyone had been fooled. Thinking about it, they were a little angry. He deserved to die. Becoming a useless person is indeed the punishment he deserved. In this way, he deserved it. But I think it's better for the position of the head of the family to be inherited by the original heir. It should be so. Situ Hua had seen everything that should have belonged to him, waving at him from afar. If he succeeded this time, then in the future, he could return to his position again. Not only did he not have to hide, but he could also finally take out the things in his family. He could also return the kindness that was as heavy as a mountain in his heart. But at this moment, the crowd suddenly parted to make a path. For people slowly walked out. One of them had a feminine face. With a few shallow wrinkles on his face, he suddenly shouted. Chapter 985. This is inappropriate. What's inappropriate? The people who came were the four great elders of the Situ family. The one who spoke was the second elder, Sitalon. This person had always been a little feminine and gloomy. He also had a high status among the elders. He was extremely powerful and had a very high status. However, he had been suppressed by the first elder for many years. However, regardless of whether he was suppressed by others, the second elder's excellence was not to be questioned. He also had a very high status in the Sidhu family. It was said that his strength was comparable to Senzin's. That was the legendary Senzin realm. There were only a few in the entire wind boundary. Therefore, the second elder had a good status. At this time, he suddenly stood up and said that this matter was inappropriate, but not many people dared to refute him. Only Sidhu Hua was filled with anger and directly interrupted him, asking him what was inappropriate. Sitalan's eyes fell on Situ Guang, who was like a corpse, and he snorted coldly. If I say it's inappropriate, it's inappropriate. I haven't settled the score with you for suddenly bringing a few outsiders here. Can you introduce the people behind you to me? They look very unfamiliar to me, and their strength is not enough. I'm afraid that someone with bad intentions sent them to you to sow discord. I watched Situ Shen grow up. He's definitely not as bad as you said. Even if he is, that's our Situ family's private matter. You brought a few outsiders here and made everyone in the Situ family lose face in public. Do you know the status of the two words Situ in the wind boundary? It was only at this moment that the disciples of the Situ clan noticed these few peerless and extraordinary people from other clans. The wind boundary placed great importance on family inheritance. There was no sect view, but bloodline was very important. If they were labeled as outsiders, they would be unanimously rejected. There might be politeness, but there would be some uncertainty about approval. Previously, no one paid attention to them and only thought that they were the friends of their young master. However, now that the second elder mentioned it, they became more bewildered. At a glance, Qin Yu and the other two could tell that they were not simple characters. Each and every one of them was a proud son of heaven. Only Xintian Shenzhen was strong enough to hide his aura. It looked a little ordinary. However, the elegance and bearing of his body was not something that could be easily concealed. Thus, in the eyes of the crowd, they were three extremely mysterious outsiders with unknown origins. Even though Situ Huan knew that the second elder had ulterior motives, he didn't know what to say. Even if he explained it over and over again, no one would believe him. This was a fact that he had recognized long ago. The hearts of people in this world were not what they used to be. No matter how much he said, he was afraid that not many people would be willing to listen to him. You ignorant people don't even know what's going on. Do you really think that Situ Sheng is so cruel and merciless with so many trusted subordinates under him that I can really come back safe and sound? If it weren't for this trip, where both master and disciple helped me a lot, and where we met by chance in the feudal era, I'm afraid that I would have become a corpse long ago. However, there's no point in telling you all this. If you want to know, then know. If you don't want to know, do you think I care about this Situ clan? The elders looked at each other in dismay, but their expressions were cold. Who sat on the patriarch seat did not have much to do with them. Only the second elder continued to be aggressive, asking one question after another. This caused a faint worry in everyone's hearts to turn into faint bewilderment. After all, it was better to be safe than sorry. What if all of this was an elaborate trap, then how could there be so many coincidences in this world? Situ Hua had been rescued time and time again. Could it be that this was a meticulously planned trap from the start? If that was the case, then everything could be explained. Why were there so many coincidences in this world? Because there were no coincidences in this world. Everything was just a trap, just a scam. Perhaps, inadvertently, the second elder, Sitolan, suddenly mentioned the second clan, the Qi clan. The battle for the clan's ranking had been going on for a long time. However, the Situ clan had always been the winner from the beginning to the end. This made the Qi clan, who had always been ranked second, extremely dissatisfied. However, no matter how dissatisfied they were, they could not win in the end. Every time, they failed with great regret. After a long time, the relationship between the two clans was not very good. Even on the surface, there was not much politeness. If this was an elaborate trap designed by the Qi clan to make them kill each other, then everything could be explained. Shualan's eyes were cold. Please show evidence before you speak. If you don't have any evidence, then this is slander. Empty words without evidence, just based on guesses, to make everyone believe your words. What a good plan. It's also shocking that there are so many pitiful people in this world who have been deceived. You can't even see through such an obvious provocation. It really surprises me. It turns out that this is all there is to it. The Situ clan. These were all nonsense to begin with. Chinyu was too lazy to argue with such a person who obviously had bad intentions. However, she cannot bear it. She had to clear Chinyu's name. These slander, without any evidence, could not represent anything. However, there were actually quite a few people who believed her. This was what really surprised her. The Situ clan was just this. The Great Elder suddenly shouted, "Enough! Sit-Alon, haven't you seen enough of this farce? Even if they don't know why they came, since they are here, they are guests. They won't become sinners just because you say a few words." There were two meanings in these words. The first was to reprimand Sit-Alon, so that she could restrain her disgusting mouth. Secondly, there was a hint of warning in his voice. This was for everyone to hear. If something really happened, it was not something that could be settled with just a few words. If something really happened, it was not something that could be concealed with just a few words. They naturally had a rough idea of what the final truth would be. Anyway, there would be a result in the end. Why was there a need to be so anxious to get a result now? The Great Elder himself was quite sensible and didn't care much about these mundane matters. However, he represented authority. He could only sit in the position of the Great Elder if he had enough strength. It was not an empty title. Therefore, under the circumstances where everyone had their own thoughts, Yi Zichen and the others had their own thoughts, he could still maintain absolute calmness. He handled this matter from the fairest point of view. Chapter 986. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. There was no personal bias. There was no deviation. Under the lead of the Great Elder, they arrived at the back of the mountain where the elders lived. It was much bigger than a city. If a weaker cultivator were to travel at full speed for a day and a night, they might not be able to take care of every detail. The elders had a high status, and the mountain where they lived was a holy land. Everywhere was filled with a pure and holy aura. Naturally, every place was the best. The place was very spacious. Not only could they grow some lingji and spirit herbs, but they could also raise a large group of immortal beasts. Suddenly, a group of elegant white cranes flew slowly in the sky. Their figures were ethereal and elegant. It made it seem like a real fairyland that was isolated from the rest of the world. It was a pity that most of these beautiful things were useless. Therefore, Chinyu only glanced at them and was not interested. Who would have thought that the dignified Situ clan actually liked to put on a show? Moreover, they did not only put in a little effort, they did a lot. The corner of Situ Hua's mouth twitched when he saw this. Naturally, he knew about these expenses. As the #1 family, they had to spend money to keep up appearances. However, these were too extravagant and wasteful in his eyes. At this moment, he still had a lot of debts. If the Situ family were to fall into his hands again, he would be able to do so. He would take back everything that originally belonged to him. He had to reorganize the Situ family from top to bottom. He had to let everyone understand that the Situ family was not an extravagant and wasteful place. They should cultivate diligently and frugally. Otherwise, what would they look like if they were too greedy and indulgent? The real face should be strength, and not these superficial things that looked good but were actually useless. They had to make use of all the red-crowned cranes and mountains. They sold all the red-crowned cranes or raised them in captivity. They planted or raised immortal beasts in the mountains. At the very least, they had to accumulate wealth to be able to repay the favors they owed. This was something that the elders did not know. From now on, the huge Situ family might live a poor life. Their expenses would also be treated harshly. At this moment, the elders, who had not expected this, had all returned to his side. They had lived in the back mountain of the Holy Land for a long time, and all the mountain ranges belonged to them. All of them had extraordinary characteristics. Because the Great Elder's status was extremely noble, everyone went directly to the Great Elder's temporary residence. This was the best place for them to discuss for now. Second Elder Sidolan was still unwilling to give up. He gnashed his teeth and tried to smear the reputation of this group of people. After all, the sudden appearance of these people gave him a great sense of threat. There was one thing that she had never mentioned, and that was the secret deal she had with Situ Sheng. The reason why Situ Sheng was able to obtain information about that secret place was because of her. She had done so many things, but in the end, all her efforts were for naught. How could she not be heartbroken? How could he not be embarrassed? Since these people might be related to this matter, then he was Situ Lan's enemy. No matter what, he would not let these people get their rewards without a scratch today. These people's arrival is really strange. Don't you have any doubts in your hearts? I don't believe that I'm the only one who doubts their identity and origin. Of course, I only have suspicions. I don't have any evidence, so I won't do anything to them. But their strength is extremely insufficient. It's better to be a little more careful. This is good for both of us. Second Elder's words were very clear, and there was no taboo at all. He said what he wanted to say. It seemed that he was used to being arrogant on normal days. Originally, Situ Hua did not know much about these elders, but this matter was equivalent to scolding him indirectly. On one hand, he was puzzled, and on the other hand, he was extremely angry. Now that he had been dragged into the water, if he did not give an explanation, even his name would be stained. Although this did not hinder him much, who asked it to be so disgusting? Qin Yu suddenly said something that no one understood. Do you know how Situ Sheng was crippled? Of course, no one knew, but this did not mean that they remembered Situ Sheng's miserable appearance. After a while, they felt a faint chill in their hearts. But in their hearts, to be able to do that, it must be an extremely powerful senior. And although they had doubts, they did not suspect that the person who did this was among the three of them. The elders firmly believed in their own guesses. But in the next moment, they saw something that shocked them. Just like this, a blade fell, and then like this, another blade. Each blade was extremely accurate and extremely fast. Even Great Elder was unable to react. He was the strongest person present besides Xiantian Shenzhen. Before Xiantian Shenzhen stood out, he thought that he was the strongest. He really wanted to negotiate with them properly. But this happened too suddenly, to the extent that he was caught off guard. By the time he reacted, it was already too late. Sidolan's body was already covered in blood. Even if he wanted to fight back now, he did not have much strength, because his current appearance was like Situ Sheng, who was sent over before. He was in a sorry state and covered in blood. No one expected this. If only a little more time had passed, the marks on Sidolan's body would have turned into a pile of dried blood like Situ Sheng. He looked extremely dirty, miserable, and crazy. After all, which expert would not go crazy if they suddenly lost their strength? This sudden turn of events caused everyone to be unable to react in time. They did not react, and even if they did, it would be useless. The second elder had already taken the lead, feeling the pain in his body and the unspeakable grief. Second elder suddenly went crazy. His hands were claw-shaped and stained with traces of black. Not good. He has turned into a demon. But if he is not tainted by demon chi, how can he be connected to a demon? Sidolan has been sneaking around before. It can't be just a while ago, right? But no one dared to stop him. As long as they were attacked, they would also become strange like Sidolan. No one was willing to take such a big risk. After all, even if Sidolan had turned into a demon, he would not recognize his former clansman. Sidolan's target from beginning to end was gradually only one person. By the time her anger subsided, nothing would happen. Even Great Elder thought so, let alone the other two. They even had some expectations. Chapter 987. Translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations. The strength of this outsider was indeed unclear, and he could pose a great threat to them. Instead of leaving him alone, it was better to give it a try. Let's see if Sidolan, who is now possessed, could kill him. Situ Hua was still recognized by them, and the young master was also the heir to the position of patriarch. But this outsider made them feel uneasy. Perhaps Situ Hua was the only one with the bloodline of the Situ family present who was truly worried. But then he knew that all his worries were unnecessary. Qingyu did not make any extra movements. He just raised his hand. He casually defeated Situ Lan, who was as strong as a madman. He suppressed her with his own strength. However, there was no bloody scene. But when he raised his hand, he had completely lost all signs of life. Although the scene looked extremely simple. However, no one would treat this as an easy task. If it was anyone else who came, if they dared to directly raise their hand like this, they would definitely die, and their ending would be miserable. But now this seemingly young man had not only done this, he also really did what no one else could do. Situ Lan died, and her death was extremely miserable. There was even a hint of madness on her face. Her body was surrounded by a faint demonic aura, and she looked neither fish nor fowl. Her corpse was also disgusting. Such a person was destined to be the shame of the entire family. Therefore, the elders looked at each other and decided to keep it a secret. Instead of explaining why such a thing happened, it was better to think about how to completely hide this matter. No one was willing to take such a big risk. After all, this person was an elder of their Situ family. If something happened to this person in their Situ family, then it would become a scapegoat that the Situ family had to bear, and it would be a stain for eternity. The great elder suddenly spoke. From now on, the Situ family will no longer have a Situ Lan. Wait a minute. The Dongming Saintess suddenly stood up. The identity of the Dongming Saintess was extremely arrogant. But in front of the elders, she had always been a well-behaved junior. She also had some face. At this moment, when they saw her suddenly stand up, they slightly stopped their actions. Especially the great elder, who usually did not think twice about anyone, was more generous to this little disciple. After the Dongming Saintess stood on their side, he suddenly began to criticize. The words that came out of his mouth shocked the crowd even more, especially Situ Hua, whose face was full of disbelief. I can testify that these outsiders are all evil, and they are all powerful. Especially that old man over there. They already have the strength and identity. But they have been hiding their strength and identities. Let's not talk about their origins. I even overheard them discussing how to seize the Situ clan's assets. They're here for the entire Situ clan. Situ Hua shouted Situ's. He shouted this was his biological sister was. But no matter how he looked at her, she was still his familiar little sister. Her face was still capricious and charming, and the clothes she wore had not changed at all. She was dressed in plain white, but there were bright ornaments on her head. She was indeed the person he was most familiar with. But the words she said now made him feel that this person was so unfamiliar. This was clearly bullshit, and it was all made up. She had mentioned the Situ family before, but that was the reward she had offered. Otherwise, why would she help him for no reason when she had great strength and her own purpose? It's not like there's any good relationship between them. But obviously, the others did not understand, especially after hearing what the Dongming Saintess had said. The great elder chose to believe her. If it was only the second elder, he would be suspicious. This was because everyone knew that the second elder was usually a little unreasonable and had some prejudice towards many things. To put it bluntly, she could not stand others doing well. But now, it was indeed the Dongming Saintess who had always been obedient who said this. He believed her without thinking. This was the second person. This time, the great elder did not say anything. He attacked with lightning speed. He wanted to take the opportunity to make things difficult. He had already asked the third elder to restrain the old man next to him. He did not need to delay for too long. He just needed to give him a while to make things difficult for this young man, whose strength was far lower than his. That was enough. After the great elder showed his strength, it gave Situ Hua an indescribable sense of suppression. He had only felt this feeling from Xiantian Shenzhen, but if he compare it carefully, there were some differences. Although they were both Shenzhen, Xiantian Shenzhen's strength was enough to suppress him to the point that he could not breathe. But the Great Elder could only make him feel a clear sense of pressure. Phoenix water east flow. Countless faint white waves of air rushed over at a speed that was hard to see with the naked eye. Cheney did not dodge. He faced it head-on and turned his body slightly at the critical moment. That wave of air just brushed past him and did not cause him any damage. But the big knife in his hand was already clamoring, wanting to trample all the enemies under his feet. He wanted all the enemies to pay a painful price. Dominating Heaven Blade. Slash. The Great Elder spat out a mouthful of blood. There was an extremely deep wound on his abdomen. That domineering power even shattered his internal organs. He was still alive at this time because his strength had already reached Senzin's. Otherwise, even if it was a Saint King, even if it was the second Elder Sidhu Lan from before, they would definitely die after taking this blow. But even if he still had a breath, his injuries were not light. He could not even lift his fingers. In the end, he was barely able to stand up with the help of someone. The third elder, who had gone to restrain Xiantian Senzin, had already returned. But Situ Hua suddenly felt that something was wrong. Where did the fourth elder, who usually kept a low profile, go? He did not pay attention at first, but now everyone was here. But one person was missing, so he could not help but be vigilant. The fourth elder, who was hiding in the dark, looked at Shualan from afar. When Situ Hua was looking for him, a light green flying needle with broken poison appeared in his hand. Suddenly, he took a step forward and covered a considerable distance. He directly crossed space and caught people off guard. When Shualan reacted, she could only hurriedly shoot out a cold ice thorn. The Great Elder let out a cry of pain, but he did not slow down and continued to close in. The Great Elder and the third elder had already failed, and the second elder was dead. Now, he was the only one left. He only chose to attack the weakest one. Usually, his presence was rather low, so when he suddenly appeared, very few people noticed where he was. So it was best for him to do this unexpected sneak attack. Chapter 988. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Suddenly, a hand appeared out of nowhere. There was a cracking sound. The fourth elder's neck was twisted at a strange angle. One could tell at a glance that this was not an angle that an ordinary person could reach. The hearts of the elders turned cold. The fourth elder's strength was not the highest. However, he was still able to be ranked among the top among all of them. Otherwise, he would not have been able to become an elder. However, he had become a dead soul under someone else's hand so easily. They felt a chill in their hearts as they watched. This time, their people had the upper hand. Even though they had the upper hand, they still could not gain the upper hand. It was simply too frightening. The anger in the first elder's eyes seemed to have turned into something substantial. What do you mean by this? You suddenly killed 2 of the 4 great elders. This is the Situ family. Situ Hua, why don't you care about the friends you brought here? Situ Hua's face was also ashen. It did not matter who was in the right and who was in the wrong. Everyone could see clearly who was in the wrong. Why should they care about these trivial things? The elders were in the wrong first. It was reasonable for them to fight back. It was a reasonable thing to do. If anyone still wanted to criticize them, they must be blind. He did not say anything. The first elder naturally knew what he meant. After Qin Yu withdrew his hand, he gently wiped it twice. The fourth elder's body was still in the same place. He died with his eyes open. Shualan was not hurt at all. However, she was attacked so suddenly. Even if it did not cause any harm, it was undoubtedly a provocation. It was a sign that he was about to attack. You attacked first. I don't know if you gave me a chance to fight back. Now that there are only 2 of the 4 great elders left, there is no need for them to exist at the same time. You will all pay the price for this. After speaking, he directly attacked. Before anyone could react, he directly chopped off one of the East Light Holy Maiden's hands and feet. It was so fast that no one could react. Sidu Hua was a little scared when he saw this. After all, this was his sister. But when he thought of the things she had done, he could not feel any sympathy for her. In that case, he deserved to be punished. It was better for him not to interfere. Once he interfered, he might be tainted with some other meaning. If he really interfered, it would mean that he was taking sides. Moreover, it wasn't as if he didn't have any complaints in his heart. The Dongming Saintess suddenly attacked and even slandered him. This caused him to be caught in the middle, and he was in a dilemma. His heart was extremely complicated. At this moment, he was even more unwilling to see his younger sister. Therefore, when he saw the pain on the Dongming Saintess's face, he turned his head away and did not want to look anymore. As for the elders, they were all terrified. Suddenly, the great elder's face darkened, and a faint black mist appeared in his eyes. Unknowingly, a large military sphere had appeared in his hand. No one knew what was inside, but now he could use it as a trump card. One could imagine that this was definitely not something simple. Even Xiantian Shenzhen was separated by this thick layer of metal. He couldn't recognize it in a short period of time. He only knew that it should be some extremely terrifying trump card. Otherwise, the elder wouldn't be so confident, and there was a hint of struggle on his face. You forced me to do this. I didn't want to do it myself. All of this is because you forced me. I didn't have any intention of doing it. I was forced to do it. After he finished speaking, he threw the metal ball straight at Yi Zichen. Just as it was about to come into contact with Qin Yu, it suddenly exploded. Countless black chains spread out from inside, looking extremely thick. It carried a faint cold aura. Xiantian, celestial venerable, suddenly felt the aura and directly stepped forward. Qin Yu and Shuilan weren't affected at all. The people behind Xiantian Shenzhen weren't in any way. But the Great Elder and the others were more or less affected. Even if they took out this thing, they still suffered from the backlash. Xiantian Shenzhen's face slightly darkened. Some thin black lines appeared on his face, and they kept spreading on his face. It spread to his entire face, gradually forming a thick mask. However, his spirit was still fine, and his eyes were incomparably clear. It seemed that he hadn't lost his mind. I didn't expect you to have such an evil thing in your hands. It seems that the so-called upper echelons of the Sidhu family have long been rotten. No wonder someone has set their eyes on you. You come back and forth to set up so many traps. You've really overestimated yourself. Indeed, they had overestimated themselves. Not only were their thoughts not pure, but they were also extremely stupid. How could this kind of thing be used just like that? How could this kind of thing be taken out so casually? It was better to say that whether or not they could destroy the enemy in one fell swoop, they would be greatly implicated. Unfortunately, there were too few people like him who understood this. So when the Great Elder took it out, he didn't think too much from the beginning. In the end, the Great Elder's face was extremely ugly. Some black lines slowly appeared on his face and spread to his body. However, he wasn't able to do it as leisurely as Xiantian Shenzhen. Instead, he looked extremely uncomfortable, and his entire body was constantly struggling. Bulges appeared on his body one after another, and he looked like a monster that crawled out from the abyss of hell. Qin Yu walked over to take a look. Xiantian Shenzhen waved his hand. These things didn't cause much harm to him. After all, his strength was there for all to see. Moreover, his body had been tempered countless times and was extremely strong. These small things could only be looked at in front of him. However, he couldn't suppress the breakthrough that he had been painstakingly suppressing. He suddenly suffered such a heavy injury. Although it didn't cause much harm to him, there was no way for him to continue staying in this realm. Soon, he would immediately break through, and this time, there was no room for reconciliation. I have to go. This time, there's no way to continue dragging it out. After I leave, you must remember to take good care of yourself. I don't know when I'll be back this time. Maybe you'll have to wait a long time before I come back. Maybe when I come out, you'll already be preparing to break through in seclusion. There was laughter here, but some people couldn't stand it anymore. The Great Elder and the Third Elder were both in great pain. On the other side, the Dongming Saintess had one of her limbs chopped off, and the speed of the invasion was even faster. Chapter 989. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless fantasy translation, his entire body seemed to have turned into black mud. It was a horrifying sight that made people shudder in fear. Do you really think it's over? The power of the devil explosion pill is not that simple. Even Senzin will be affected. He will be in so much pain that he can't extricate himself. Even if someone can escape, there will still be people who will be affected. As long as someone is affected, they won't be able to escape the power of the devil explosion pill. The Great Elder had done everything he could. Naturally, he could not bear to see them laughing over there. The more pain he suffered, the more his mind was affected by the traces of magic power. So much so that he made some irrational actions. However, he did not regret it at all. There was a strange, carefree feeling in his heart. He should have done this long ago. How could there be so many rules and restrictions? How uncarefree was that? Why did he put so much pressure on himself? If he had the strength and ability, he should make everyone unhappy. Now, he was seriously injured and was about to die. Why did he care so much? Letting more people go to hell with him? That would be the best. Xian Tian Senzin looked at him with disdain. One could imagine how easily his mind was affected by the devil explosion pill. His usual calmness and solemnity was only because he had not encountered anything that could threaten him. How could such a sanctimonious person have any future? It was really disdainful. Tang Tang and the Situ family were just SOSO. Situ Hua was very ashamed to the side. He was not even willing to admit that these were the famous great elders of the Situ family. Not to mention how suspicious his character was, his temperament made him feel ashamed. He attacked an outsider just because of a disagreement. He didn't even have any evidence, yet he was willing to trust his own people. He did not even care if he killed the innocent. With such a character, it was no wonder that he and his father would end up in such a state. It was a pity that his father had worked hard for the Situ family all his life. In the end, because of these villains, he ended up in such a miserable state. He only hoped that he could be born into a peaceful family in his next life and not come to such a big family again. People's hearts were not what they used to be, and the world's morals were deteriorating day by day. It was really disappointing. It was even more unsuitable for people like them who truly had a bottom line in their hearts. This place was completely muddy water. Anyone who stepped in would be stained with mud for no reason. Qin Yu directly raised his saber and slashed a few times on the Great Elder's body. On the other side, the Third Elder didn't do much. Thus, he severed the tendons in his arms and legs and made him suffer some pain before sending him straight to hell. However, the Great Elder was the one who had personally thrown out the devil explosion pill. Moreover, it was indiscriminate. Therefore, he directly broke his arms and legs, making him unable to move. In the end, when he concealed his last breath, he prepared to hang on to his life for another attack. However, at this moment, Situ Hua suddenly walked out and hurriedly shouted, "Spare the man," although he couldn't help but feel disdain for the First Elder's moral character. After all, this person was an elder of the Situ clan. There were too many things in his mind. Didn't he need the help of these things right now? After all, he was still inexperienced. If he didn't have an experienced senior to guide him from the front, without a guide, his path was destined to be extremely complicated. However, if there was a great elder under his control, it would be completely different. He could get enough information from the great elder. He also knew what he should do step by step. He could completely control the great elder, who had become a cripple and had nothing left except for his last breath in the palm of his hand. He had to do whatever he wanted him to do. Other people simply couldn't make him do this. Therefore, the best thing for him at the moment was to spare the great elder's life. I can use the precious collection of the clan to exchange with you. The Situ clan has existed in this place for tens of thousands of years. There have been many powerful figures among them. I heard that the ancestor was a famous true god senior, so his collection is extremely rich. I'm willing to use these collections to exchange with you. It's enough as long as he's still alive. Originally, the great elder revealed some hope when he heard the first part. However, after hearing the last part, all the hope turned into despair. What was the difference between this and killing him directly? No, there was still some difference. Because from then on, he couldn't die even if he wanted to. At the moment, his hands and feet were already broken. Other than this head, there was basically nothing left. From then on, he would be meat on someone else's chopping board. He didn't even have the right to commit suicide. He could only passively endure all the pain. Xiandian Shenzhen smiled and reached out to pat Sidu Hua. Your idea is not bad. Living a life worse than death is a very suitable ending for him. Then let's do it. Sidu Hua was a little excited. Since Xiantian Shenzhen said so, this matter was basically half successful. However, the other half still depended on Qin Yu's opinion. If he didn't agree, everything would be for naught. It was just him talking to himself, and he was having fun here. Living a life worse than death was indeed a better punishment. Qin Yu didn't have any opinion. He directly withdrew his hand, but the other person couldn't escape the blame. Even if they were related by blood, it didn't help. Situ Hua was Situ Hua, and Qin Yu was Qin Yu. Since the Dongming Saintess wanted to take their lives and used such a method to slander them, she deserved to be punished. However, because he had used her hand to avoid it once in the past, even if he didn't need her at that time, this friendship was there. He didn't kill her and gave her a little chance to breathe. His intention was to let the Dongming Saintess take the initiative to tell him the reason. What is it for? Looking at the elders' corpses on the ground, the Dongming Saintess trembled. She immediately cried and shouted that she had been possessed by a demon. She didn't do it on purpose. In the end, Qin Yu didn't have any intention of showing mercy to the fairer sex and directly attacked. He neatly cut off the remaining hand and foot. He made her a cripple like the Great Elder. This was also a punishment. Of course, after the cultivation of natural treasures, she should be able to recover a little. However, after all, he used such a dominating heaven blade to cut off her hands and feet. From then on, it was impossible for her to return to normal. Even with all her strength, she could only stop here. It was completely impossible for her to go any further. Under such pain, the Dongming Saintess suddenly went crazy and said the truth in her heart. She was just jealous and unwilling. In addition, Sidu Lan usually had a good relationship with her. In the end, she did something wrong. Chapter 990. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The previous matter had been settled for the time being. However, the huge amount of rewards that Situ Hua had mentioned in the past had not been fulfilled yet. At this point, he was too embarrassed to drag it on any longer. Even the 4 great elders had fallen to this point. He casually threw the corpses to outsiders, and no one dared to refute him. This time, it was too easy for him to take control of power. No one dared to refute his opinion. When he ordered the treasury to be opened, someone immediately went to open the most important treasury of the Sidu family. Of course, the key was kept by the Great Elder. However, now that the Great Elder was dead, everything that belonged to him had fallen into Situ Hua's hands. No one had any objections to this. The winner was king, and the loser was a bandit. The principle of the world was so eternal and unchanging. If it were any human right, it would be the same. Moreover, Situ Hua was not an outsider now. He truly had the right to inherit the family's inheritance. It was natural for him to inherit the position of the head of the family, since he had such strength and had such a powerful expert as a friend. All of this should belong to him. However, in the blink of an eye, the countless wealth that had fallen into his hands had fallen into Qin Yu's hands. There was a dazzling array of items in the few warehouses, and there were countless of them. At a glance, one could not even see the end. Even the warehouses were specially made, and the space inside looked much larger than the space outside. From the outside, it looked just like a few small houses. However, if one walked inside, one would find that it was simply endless. There were all kinds of treasures everywhere, and it was too much for the eyes to take in. However, these treasures were well placed, and they were the Situ family's collection for tens of thousands of years. The ones in the periphery aren't considered exceptional treasures. They're usually given to the disciples of the clans who have a bright future as cultivation resources. Further enter the expenses of some elders of the family with status, and they're all transferred from here. Of course, they also have to make certain contributions to the family from time to time. The innermost is the most precious, and it is the foundation of the entire family. However, since he had already said that he would take out at least 2/3 of it, these were all calculated. These things were naturally included in his calculations. He was a man of his word. Moreover, building a good relationship with Yu and the others would only stabilize his position. With their strength, Hua's relationship with them could only be beneficial. Moreover, the foundation of the Situ family would not be so easily defeated. As long as they were still there, it would only be a matter of time for them to develop again. At most, he could develop by unscrupulous means, or Situ Hua translation, there were many ways to develop, even if he had to take out more than half of the family's property. Qin Yu was indeed. Of these things were the things in the periphery. As he walked as he saw, and he was. Therefore, he didn't take a fancy to it and directly walked past it. These things were was translation, was there, and was to be found in. This caught his attention. He did not know if it was his illusion, but when he looked over, he saw a rising dragon shadow inside. But if he looked carefully, he could only see a translucent blank space. There was basically nothing inside. This thing is a bit strange. It was an unexpected harvest when the ancestor went out, but it has always been regarded as a treasure. Although no one can understand what this stone is used for, it contains an extraordinary power. It's just that there is no way to use it. Basically, it is no different from a decoration. But after all, it was also one of their collections, and it was extremely precious. Situ Hua looked at this palm-sized crystal stone. He did not know if Qin Yu had taken a fancy to it or not. But to be honest, although he had to take out a large amount of resources, if Qin Yu took a fancy to this crystal stone, which was of no use to him, it was also not bad. At least it could save him a lot of things. After all, although this stone looked a bit useless, it was a treasure that the ancestor had brought back. The ancestor was the only one in the Situ family who broke through the true God realm. He was an extremely powerful expert in the entire wind realm. He brought back a lot of precious things. In the end, Qin Yu still followed his intuition and held this palm-sized crystal stone in the palm of his hand. Since he had a faint feeling, it would be more reassuring to hold it directly in the palm of his hand. Xiantian Shenzhen also came here to stroll around, but that black fog kept spreading on his body. Strands of black thread spread all over the place. After more than half of his entire body was covered by the black threads, Xiantian Shenzhen finally had to leave immediately, unnaturally. If this continued, he was afraid that he would break through on the spot. At that time, with the power of his breakthrough, the entire Situ family would not be able to preserve a single tile. One had to know that breaking through to the true God realm was basically going against the heavens. Many tests had to be passed. It was extremely difficult. At that time, everything around him would be destroyed. This was not something that could be easily broken through just because the conditions were right. That was simply impossible. I really can't take it anymore. I'll leave first. Disciple, take care of yourself, and help me take care of little Shualon. I really hope that time passes slower. Why do we have to separate again so soon? Qin Yu did not have much emotion to begin with. At this time, looking at Xiantian, he was the most long-winded. On the contrary, his mood did not fluctuate at all. The little bit of melancholy had long been scattered. It wasn't like they couldn't meet again. It was just a breakthrough. This was a great thing. Only the profound heaven celestial venerable was so stubborn as to suppress it, different from everyone else. If it were anyone else, if they did not break through when the time came, they would be anxious like ants on a hot pan. They would think of all kinds of ways to break through with all their might. Only Xiantian Shenzhen was so strange, different from everyone else, to be able to use such an attitude to break through. And if he was not forced into a corner, he would not even be willing to break through. Looking around, Xiantian Shenzhen directly chose the most spacious place in the wind world. It was a desert everywhere. There was basically no life, although there were a few scattered cities on the other side of the continent. But if it was a more shabby place, it would be desolate and uninhabited. It was also very suitable for him to break through. No one could disturb him. Chapter 991. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Suddenly, dark clouds rolled in the sky. All kinds of ferocious beasts appeared, even if they were just illusions. It seemed that real ferocious beasts had appeared, and they were about to leave the range of the dark clouds and wreak havoc in the human world. Everyone who saw them could not help but flee. But after a while, the dark clouds still did not move. Some knowledgeable people turned pale with fright. Such a strange phenomenon. Could it be that someone wants to break through to the true God realm? At the same time, almost everyone in the ninefold divine realm could see this scene. It did not matter if it was an ordinary person or a powerful almighty. They could see the rolling dark clouds and the monstrous murderous aura. They could not help but have a thought. If someone was targeted by this murderous aura and the extremely ferocious clouds, what kind of scene would that be? No one would be able to escape from these dark clouds. No matter how powerful someone was, they would definitely not have the ability to escape from the dark clouds. Such a huge, strange phenomenon. It was impossible to say that there was not an extremely powerful person who could do this. Suddenly, as time passed, more and more people saw more and more. Some of the more powerful ones could be seen under the dark clouds. There was a figure standing tall with a straight back. Even if no one could see the person's face, they could see how magnificent he was. Any extremely powerful person who appeared in this world would be sought after by everyone. Not to mention those who were strong enough to dare to face these layers of dark clouds. In addition, some people gradually figured out something. Such a big movement was most likely caused by a true god who was about to be born. That was the legendary true god realm. The dark cloud stayed for a long time and did not disperse for a long time. Breaking through to the true god realm was an extremely complicated matter. No one knew how long it would take for it to slowly end. This matter became a matter of discussion. But after all, it was too far away for everyone. Only some of the Sinzen realm people were enraged. After all, they were not very far away from this realm. If they worked harder, they might be able to break through. Some of them were old monsters who had been stuck at the peak for a long time and could not break through no matter what. He even wanted to give a try. If this person succeeded, there would really be people who would give it a try. After all, that was the legendary true god. Now that there were no more true gods in the world, Sinzen was already a rare existence. As long as there were old monsters in the realm of Sinzen, they were the masters of a realm. In the entire god realm, they had extremely high authority, not to mention the more powerful true gods. If a true god wanted to, they could even unify the ninefold god world and conquer the world. Although this was only a possibility. However, this was a possibility that many people had thought about before. Even more so, it had been an exaggeration of praising true god experts for countless years. In ancient times, there were true gods who could ignore the void devils and soar freely in the void. Furthermore, they could travel between the upper and lower realms as they wished. If one reached the highest level, they could even open up an independent world. There were so many rumors, and many of them could no longer be trusted. However, it lured one after another powerful experts to pursue the legendary true god realm. On this side, Chinyu took that palm-sized green crystal and set off on his journey. This palm-sized green crystal actually came from Sora, Shenron. However, this was, after all, a special communication item between Shenron. It was unknown where the old ancestor of the Sidhu family had gotten it from. He must have discovered the extraordinariness of this crystal, so he brought it back as a collection. However, it was, after all, a special communication item between Shenron. If it wasn't Shenron, or if it didn't know the method, there was no way to use it. Of course, if it was broken violently, Shenron would be able to receive the news and sense it. However, other than that, it didn't have any other use. However, if it was opened using Shinran's method, it could be used to directly contact the owner of this crystal. In other words, it was Sora Shinran that Shinyu had come to this god realm to find. Coincidentally, there was a Kanshui Shinran beside him who knew the use of this crystal. Thus, everything fell into place. Because the other party was erratic, it took him a lot of effort to find traces of Sora Shinran. When he finally arrived at the place, he discovered that it was actually a city in the clouds. This so-called city in the clouds wasn't like the cloud immortal city in the immortal realm. Instead, it was a huge city that was truly hidden in the clouds and could move at any time. However, the strange thing was that in the entire wind realm, almost no one knew about this city. Perhaps those who were strong enough could vaguely sense it, but they couldn't capture it. Apart from the owner of the entire wind realm, Sora Shinran, who else could do this? Kanshui Shinran didn't transform into its original body. Instead, it had always maintained a very small feeling. It didn't seem to be a tiny bit long, just like an ordinary little snake. However, no one knew, and there was no way to tell from this simple appearance. In fact, this was an extremely terrifying Shinran. No one could tell, and only the people involved could know a little about it. However, Kanshui Shinran didn't care about this anymore, because there was no point in caring about these things. He had already bowed his head and even left the water realm that he relied on for survival. Other things like face weren't important anymore. What's more, there would soon be a dragon like him who would become Qin Yu's subordinate. That guy is too cunning, wandering around in the clouds all day long. But don't think that I can't find him like this. Kanshui Shinran directly transformed into half the size of its original body. If it really transformed into its original body, it would attract the attention of everyone in the wind realm. Originally, if it was only half the size of its original body, it would have the same effect. However, in reality, the commotion caused by Xintian Senzin's breakthrough was really too big. It attracted the attention of everyone in the ninefold god realm over there. If there was a big commotion in a more remote place, very few people would notice. After all, there was no bigger commotion than when someone broke through to the true god realm. Qin Yu brought Shuolan and stepped directly on the head of Shinran. They soared into the 9 heavens. After circling around the majestic palace a few times, they directly floated down and stepped on the steeple at the top of the city wall. Half the size of Shinran's original body was somewhat inconspicuous compared to this majestic city. Chapter 992. Traces of Shinran Qi leaked out. Kanshui Shinran only said that the other party was now in a deep sleep. If there was no big movement to wake him up, it would be very difficult for him to wake up. Qin Yu pondered for a moment, then suddenly raised the dominating heaven blade and slashed down. Suddenly, half of the huge palace was shattered. It turned into countless fragments with a rumble and fell to an unknown place. Suddenly, a clear light came out of the main hall. Sora Shinran's figure appeared, and he was the first to sense the aura of his old friend. He had just woken up from a deep sleep and was still a little confused. Now that there were no changes in the wind realm, he basically had nothing to do in Shinran. Why are you here all of a sudden? Did something happen? But I didn't feel anything. No. Sora Shinran just saw 2 people standing on top of his old friend's head. Every Shinran had their own dignity, and no one was allowed to trample on it. But now he saw 2 people standing on top of his old friend's head, and he couldn't help but be a little surprised. Kanshui Shinran solemnly introduced himself, his current master. The contract had been signed, and he was completely resigned. It was not bad to follow a master with a promising future. At least he could walk around and see. Now he really had nothing to regret. This new master's master was about to break through to the true god realm, and his current strength was not considered very eye-catching. If he kept dragging it out, no one could say for sure who was stronger in the end. What's more, his time was very, very long. Even if he spent 10,000 years accompanying a person through his complete lifespan, so what? Just treat it as entering the city to experience the life of ordinary people and look at the scenery below. Otherwise, these Shinran people would always rest day after day and sleep day after day. For the sake of that illusory mission, it seemed a little laughable. Sora Shinran knew what kind of personality his friend had in the past, and naturally found it hard to believe. But no matter how one looked at Shinran's aura, it was not something that could be disguised just because one wanted to. He could only scratch his head. Perhaps this was the truth, and he was just thinking too much. But why did I wake up just now? Only to find that more than half of his palace has been destroyed. And how did you find me? Even if you want to find me, you would have to spend some effort. Kanshui, Shinran didn't answer too many questions. He simply tossed the palm-sized crystal to him. This small piece of crystal was too insignificant for them. But Sora, Shinran saw it and fell into his claws. Suddenly, the palm-sized stone grew to the height of a person. Finally, it was a little clearer, and it was just the right size for a dragon. This was something he had taken out before, so he could naturally recognize it. But so what if they recognized him? The Blue Sun Divine Dragon hesitated for a moment. Finally, he asked why they had come here. Now, he didn't think that Kanshui Shinran was just here to catch up with him. She had spent so much effort to search for him and found him in such a short time. Even if it was just to catch up with him, there must be another purpose. Moreover, now that Kanshui Shinran had recognized a master, there was a certain difference between him and the Origin Dragons. This was because these Origin mystical dragons had nothing to worry about. They didn't care about anything. They definitely didn't have a master, and they definitely wouldn't let others step on their heads. I did come here to catch up with you this time. At the same time, I also have something to discuss with you. Are you interested in serving a master with me? You just need to take out a drop of Origin Blood Essence. Believe me, this is very interesting, and it definitely won't disappoint you. Sora, Shinran moved forward slightly in disbelief. Kanshui Shinran's words made him feel a little ridiculous. Since when did Shinran recognize a master? And it depended on who Shinran was. Maybe it was because he was too bored and wanted to kill some time. But he actually wanted to drag him down with him. What's more, he wanted him to take out the Origin Blood Essence. How important was that? From the day they were born, every single one of the mystical dragons had a clear memory of everything that had happened. Naturally, they couldn't ignore it so easily. That was the Origin Blood Essence. It was the most important thing to each of them. The words, "You're crazy," were stuck in his throat, and he couldn't say it out. As an old friend, he could see it. The Kanshui Divine Dragon was seriously looking for him to talk. But it was because he was serious that made him a little angry. What is wrong with this guy? He actually proposed such a thing for no reason. He didn't even think about it before rejecting the offer. Killing intent even rose within him. If it was because of this young human who suddenly appeared, then he didn't recommend eliminating this hidden danger. Shinran didn't need a master, and he didn't need to feel bored. As long as he kept guarding, every divine realm was enough. Although he yearned for freedom, he still firmly remembered these ideas in his nature. And the bottom line was even harder to break. Even if he yearned for freedom, he was still trapped in the wind realm. He was unwilling to take a step out, because he regarded the entire wind realm as his responsibility. Of course, he couldn't ignore his responsibility. It was even more impossible to abandon his responsibility and ignore it. Kanshui Shinran was also a little impatient. "Master, please stand aside first. I will definitely persuade them. I'm doing this for your own good. Why don't you understand my painstaking efforts? Now that it's like this, it's good for you, good for me, and good for everyone." He didn't know what kind of terrifying existence Chinyu was. This guy simply didn't have any weaknesses. What's more, under the situation of signing a contract, he couldn't just stand by and watch. He was going to intervene, and now he was doing this in advance just to let his old friend think it through. He wouldn't have to go through hardships like him. But who knew that this guy couldn't understand his good intentions at all? Song Yun Divine Dragon let out a heavy snort. "I don't care why you're doing this. I can't control you, but don't try to drag me down. Instead of persuading me, it's better to have a good fight with me. I don't know if your strength has improved after such a long time. If you beat me and I can't fight back, maybe you can force me to sign a contract." Kanshui Shinran was a little anxious when he heard this. He was afraid that Yu would make a move before him. So he suddenly turned into the size of his original body. This place was originally relatively hidden. Even if the two Shinran turned into the size of his original body, it wasn't easy to be discovered. Chapter 993. Until now, there were 9 great Shinran origins. Every one of them was a peerless powerhouse, standing at the peak of strength. Whenever they appeared, it would definitely cause all kinds of strange phenomena. The 2 extremely powerful origin dragons suddenly began to fight. But the sky fell and the earth cracked. With the lesson learned from the immortal world, they slightly controlled it, not to the point where they could break the firmament. However, just a little bit of its power was enough to cause a huge commotion. Suddenly, a mountain peak exploded, revealing the boiling magma underground. Countless sects suffered a calamity, and there were floods in some places. There were also tornadoes wreaking havoc everywhere. On one side, there was a flood, and on the other, there was an extreme drought. On one side, the sky fell and the earth cracked, and on the other, it was freezing cold. Naturally, there were countless clans that were still bitterly holding on. But such a huge commotion still caused the entire wind domain to be restless. Where exactly was the source of this commotion? No one could say for sure. It was as if it came suddenly, and a few powerful beings just wanted to check it out. But they were beaten back by the aftershocks and were seriously injured. They could only slowly clean up the mess below. Fortunately, the mess was not to the point where they collapsed. It was just that it was extremely troublesome to deal with. Large and small clans took action at the same time, which was barely able to control the situation. The powerful beings knew in their hearts that this farce would definitely not stop until the powerful seniors above them stopped. So what the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't grieve over. As long as the clans were not destroyed, others did not matter. Whether others lived or died had nothing to do with them, so let them be. But there was no way for others. There were too many people who died like this. Although there were many powerhouses, there were still more weaklings. Ants were everywhere. Under such natural and man-made disasters, there was no way to hold on. It just had to happen at a time when chaos was everywhere. There were also some people who bemoaned the state of the universe and pitted the fate of mankind. But in fact, they were doing those things. Burning, killing, and looting everywhere. It was chaos everywhere. Occasionally, there would be some chaos. It was normal. Even the people of the large clans did not have so much energy to manage each and every one of them. What the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't grieve over. He had to deal with the chaos in other places first. Occasionally, they would send some people and let them just watch over there. Yu stood at a high vantage point and had a panoramic view. With a wave of his hand, a water mirror appeared, showing all the chaos in the world. No matter what, this matter had something to do with him. What the eye does not see, the heart does not grieve over. The others could just stand by and watch, but since he had seen it, they couldn't just stand by and watch. It was not clear when the 2 Shinran forces would stop fighting. Whenever he wanted to make a move, Kanshue Shunran would immediately stop him. He only said that it was a matter between Shinran and Shinran, and then he didn't care anymore. In any case, it was impossible to fight for a longer time. Kanshue Shinran had promised him that there would be a result within 3 days. But it was only the first day, and it had already caused such a huge mess. If no expert appeared and took control of this situation, it would only become more and more chaotic. Everywhere was in chaos. This was definitely not a good sign. Even the Wind Realm couldn't withstand such a huge chaos. Shualan's mind was connected with his. She suddenly smiled gently. She took out 2 robes of the same style. The patterns on them were almost the same, but one was a man's robe and the other was a woman's robe. The 2 of them put it on and changed their appearance in the eyes of outsiders. At least, ordinary people would never be able to see their appearance through this layer of clothing. Why don't we go down and be righteous men? None of the experts in the world have made a move. No matter how I think about it, only the 2 of us outsiders have the ability to do so. Qin Yu also smiled. He wasn't the kind of person who didn't care about the world. Since this matter was more or less related to him, and no one in the world made a move, then what could he do? It wouldn't be wrong to treat it as a pastime for these 3 days. Thus, everyone saw a man and a woman descending like gods. They suddenly appeared, and whenever they made a move, they would save countless lives. If there were thieves, he didn't even need to look at them. They would casually beat them into powder. They would make them disappear from this world. If someone harbored evil intentions, they would be able to see it clearly. No one would be able to escape their eyes. Thus, the chaos gradually calmed down. Although there were still many things, it was very complicated. But the people's hearts were very stable. The people in the big and small families didn't care about who this person who suddenly appeared was. His strength was at least a mighty figure, or perhaps a senior who didn't appear in the world. But since he made a move, it reduced their pressure. After that, even if there were some rumors of worship in the world, and even if they had supporters, they didn't care much, because they really couldn't free themselves. What's more, it was just 2 people. Could 2 people be compared with a family? No matter how powerful they were, no matter how high their reputation was, there is often no way to compare with the foundation of a family. In addition, there were turbulent forces everywhere, and the truly powerful ones weren't willing to make a move. It was as if they were avoiding something and worried about something. These people really couldn't free themselves to pay attention to who this expert who suddenly appeared was. They could only feel grateful in their hearts. But they didn't have the energy to think carefully about the origin and purpose of these people. In a place where the big families couldn't pay attention to, Shui Jianghua's face was full of misery. It was because he had offended a powerful big family when he was young. Now that this turmoil had appeared, he was trapped, but no one was willing to support him, and no one was willing to save him. One could imagine that it was definitely not because his character was not good. It was because some people didn't like him, so they wanted to use this opportunity to directly attack him. They wanted to eradicate a useless small figure like him. Anyway, I didn't need to spend a single soldier. They just needed to stand by and watch. But looking at the old and young behind him, how could he be willing? A group of masked men in black suddenly appeared, but they weren't here to save them. Instead, they held sharp blades in their hands and quickly reaped human lives. The leader of the group laughed wildly. Looking at countless good things being sent to him, he was very satisfied. It could more or less be called a family's collection. Although it couldn't be considered extremely sumptuous, it could be said to be not bad. At least, it was much better than he had expected. Shui Jianghua, I really hope that in your next life, you won't be so blind to offend important figures. Don't you think that those important figures are people you can easily offend? Now, this can be considered a lesson for you. Remember it well. As soon as he finished speaking, a sharp light suddenly flashed, and his head fell. Chapter 994. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The person who appeared was like a god. Even in such a filthy place with dilapidated walls and dilapidated walls. Everyone's attention was on that person. As long as they could still breathe, they would not ignore the other party. Shui Jianghua's eyes lit up with hope. He suddenly recalled some recent rumors and blurted it out. Dawn Immortal Master. No one knew their names, and no one knew where they came from. Even his appearance could not be seen clearly. They only knew that his face was constantly shrouded in light, making it difficult to distinguish his face. However, this did not prevent them from recognizing the Dawn Immortal Master. After all, he was willing to help them and did not care if he offended others. There is only one person who could do it. Everyone knew how powerful the newly appeared Dawn Immortal Lord was. How could he not fear the strong? It was as if he had only appeared to save people. If there were any major changes, the Dawn Immortal Master would appear. Whenever he appeared, he would save hundreds of people. How could he not be surprised? However, when all the assassins were killed, there were only survivors left. The Dawn Immortal Master had completely disappeared amidst the cheers. Even if they tried their best to find him, they would not be able to find the god who had suddenly appeared and disappeared. Where had he gone? It is a blessing for small families like us to have such a powerful person who is indifferent to fame and fortune. It would be great if this person revealed his identity. I, Shui Zhenghua, would be willing to follow him at all costs. I would even risk my life. A small team that had just arrived could not help but laugh when they heard his words. These people were all rescued, and almost all of them had similar experiences as Shui Zhenghua. They had walked through the gates of hell and looked at the dilapidated walls. They suddenly had an epiphany. They had spontaneously organized themselves to follow the Dawn Immortal Master's footsteps and clean up the mess. Who isn't like that? Based on the current situation, if there are more people like us, the Dawn Immortal Master alone would be equivalent to a peerless family. I also want to risk my life to follow him. If I could be his subordinate, I would be willing to die. It's a pity that no one knows where he came from, and no one knows where he went. I reckon that we might not even be able to see this person's figure. Thousands of words could be summed up into one sentence. In this world, there is no one who could compare to Dawn. He had such great strength, yet he didn't show his face in public and didn't pursue anything. After doing a good deed, he didn't want to leave his name or anything. In the God realm, where benefits were paramount, this was especially outstanding. Even if some people didn't know how to be grateful after being saved. But even if the small number of people who were grateful and willing to follow him to death were gathered together, it was still a huge number. One could only imagine how many people he had saved and how many places he had visited. However, everyone knew that the Dawn Immortal Monarch usually had a Dawn Fairy by his side. Similarly, no one knew his identity or appearance, but that didn't stop them from guessing. 1 day passed, 2 days passed, and today was the end of the 3rd day. However, the unrest did not disappear. This was already the 3rd day. If it still didn't end, no one knew when it would end. However, because of the appearance of the Dawn Immortal Lord, this did not seem too difficult. Large and small clans also contributed to this. However, if they didn't contribute, they wouldn't be able to spread to remote places. Otherwise, they wouldn't be willing to lend a helping hand because of personal grudges within their families. With all these factors added together, all of their actions had huge loopholes. If not for the appearance of the Dawn Immortal Lord, who knew how many lives would have been lost? After the 2 Shenron immortals stopped fighting, Sora, Shenron, saw the scene in front of him. The ground was littered with ruins everywhere. The wind realm that he had protected with all his heart was still split open because of his small actions, and the rivers changed their course. Even if he had held back and didn't use all his strength, you could see the scene everywhere. So could he. This place belonged to him. He had protected this place for countless years. Every blade of grass and every tree was extremely important to him. At this moment, he knew everything that had happened in the past few days. He saw the unrest in the human world and also saw the sudden appearance of the Dawn Immortal Lord. When the 2 of us were fighting, you went out to save the people of Dawn and gained a good reputation. They didn't know that the cause of this matter was because you brought the Kin water. I don't know if these people will still be grateful to you in the future when they know the cause of this matter. Sora Shenron's words carried a hint of a test. Qin didn't care about this. He only wanted to have a clear conscience, because what he wanted to do had nothing to do with anyone. The title of a savior meant nothing to him. Even if someone gave him the title of the #1 devil in the world. Even if someone said that he would cause great suffering. And if all of this was slander, he would only make the other party pay the price. However, he didn't care much about his reputation. What did it have to do with him, what the world thought of him? Could it be that Shenron would care about what the people of the world said? Obviously, it was impossible. The strong and the weak didn't have any room to talk. The world they could see was different. Whether the world was grateful or moved to tears, or whether it was misunderstanding or anger, it had nothing to do with the real strong. It couldn't affect the state of mind of the real strong. If they could be affected by these indifferent words, they wouldn't be called strong. Sora, Shenron, seemed to be a little angry. The pressure around him seemed to be more terrifying, But Qin Yu's gaze didn't change at all from the beginning to the end. He was still calm and composed. Nothing could be taken seriously by him. Even such a powerful pressure couldn't shake him in the slightest. Even if he was surprised, Shinran wouldn't have such strength. It was a matter of course. Of course, one day he would also have such powerful strength. There was no doubt about that. Do you know how excessive your conditions are? You want me, a dignified Shinran, to submit to you and call you master. This is no less than asking me to call myself a small snake on the ground. This is an insult to me. If it were someone else, I would definitely slap him to death. I wouldn't talk nonsense with him at all. As he blurted out these words, the pressure around him seemed to become a heavy burden. Chapter 995. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. From beginning to end, there was no change in his gaze. Countless amounts of pressure fell on his body, but he still stood as straight as a pine tree. I came here for only one purpose, and you know it now. Success or failure. It's a simple choice. It shouldn't be a big deal for Shinran. Even a 3-year-old can make the decision. Even if it's just a random choice, it's still relatively easy. Qin Yu's internal organs are slightly shaken. The bones in his body are giving off cracking noises. But his expression didn't change from beginning to end. Suddenly, all the pressure was removed. Sora Shinran laughed heartily. Without saying anything, he forced out a drop of his essence blood. Then his voice became much weaker, and his aura withered visibly. I gave you the thing, and now you've achieved your goal. But you have to know that it's all because you passed the test I gave you. To me, nothing is more important than this God realm. Everything I have is based on this foundation. Since you've helped me clean up the mess, I don't mind staying by your side to take a look. In fact, Sora, Shinran did lose because of it. Because he was too concerned about the situation around him, he was a little confused. In the end, he lost a little. Of course, the reason that made him do this in the end was also partly because of what he said. Of course, there's also a part of him that gloated. With the help of him and Kanshui Shinran. Obviously, Qin Yu, who didn't intend to stop here, would have set off toward the other god realms. A few other old friends, whether they were friends with him or had a grudge against him. In the end, they might not be able to escape. Besides, they took the initiative to sign an equal contract. Even if their master suffered some damage, it wouldn't be reflected back to them. If something happened to their master, they wouldn't die with him. Since that was the case, why not go and take a look? Anyway, he wasn't the first. After that, he definitely wouldn't be the last. Stuck in the middle, he didn't attract much attention, and he didn't completely lose his dignity as Shinran. Kanshui Shinran's face was ashen. For some reason, he had a bad premonition. But now, he wasn't the only one. When he thought of this, his mood became much better. The dark cloud that had always been there changed again. It turned into a long purple color. Countless bolts of lightning struck down, bringing about countless strange phenomena. The lightning-type immortal beast ran over like a madman, contributing a portion of its power. Thunder gathered the power of all living beings and unleashed a heavy strike. Who is it? To think that he would break through to the true God realm in my wind world. This is going to be fun. Qin Yu looked at the power of the lightning and suddenly had a realization. It turned out that breaking through to the true God realm was actually going against the world. He needed to fight against the power of all living beings in the world by himself, although this did not include the power of the human race. However, even if it was only a small portion of the living being's power, it was still an enormous amount. Sure enough, at the final checkpoint, there was basically no chance of survival. However, this was only true for other people. The mysterious guy Senzin was suppressed to the extreme, but he was still unwilling to break through. In fact, his strength had already reached that level. Even if this seemed extremely terrifying, his improvement was just a matter of course. It wasn't considered extremely dangerous, and there was no room for negotiation. After Sora, Shinran knew the cause and effect. He wasn't too surprised. Qin Yu had already surprised him greatly. Looking at his bone age, he didn't seem to be very old. He actually managed to break through all the obstacles all the way to the realm of the gods. With such great strength, with such heaven-defying aptitude and talent, only an extremely powerful master could accept such a person as a disciple. Therefore, it seemed to be expected that his master was even more powerful. However, he still felt a little emotional. He didn't know what kind of fate it was. It actually made two people with outstanding strength and talent in the world become master and disciple. I don't know how long it will take for your master to completely break through. At least according to the current trend, it's actually a little dangerous. However, to be honest, it's a little too early to worry now. There will be many changes later. Chinyu wasn't too worried. Success or failure, everything was in his own hands. It had nothing to do with what others said. The mysterious guy, Senzin, already had the confidence to break through long ago. It was just that he didn't want to break through in order to have more confidence. Now, he had at least 90% confidence, which was why such a change had occurred. If it weren't for a sudden accident, given the mysterious guy Senzin's character, he would probably wait until he had 100% confidence before breaking through. After all, if there were no true gods in this world, he would be invincible. No matter where he went, no one could beat him. Even if they swarmed him, they would all be defeated by him. If he wanted to break through, he would break through. If he didn't want to break through, he wouldn't. This was the benefit of having strength. Chinyu paused for a moment. He was still some distance away from breaking through to the realm of true gods. Although he was extremely powerful now, he also had many trump cards in his hands. In terms of strength, there were very few people in the ninefold realm who could be his opponent. He could go anywhere in this world, but he just had to stay in this realm. He really couldn't break through in a short period of time. Now, his realm had reached an extremely high level. If he wanted to break through, he would need a lot of natural treasures. He would need countless good things. However, with this drop of essence blood, his strength would increase again. After completely refining this drop of essence blood, his strength would definitely reach the late stage of the Sage King realm. But he would still be some distance away from Senzin. There was still a big gap between him and a true god. But if he didn't care about this and only talked about fighting strength, his strength had already broken through the limits of his realm. Suddenly, a group of people appeared, each of them extremely powerful. They came from different clans, but they had always been on good terms. The sudden appearance of the Dawn Immortal Lord disrupted all their plans, causing their reputation to hit rock bottom. Many people laughed at the people who went against them, stumbling because of them. But just when everything was about to be settled, such a person appeared. He disrupted all their plans and made them a laughingstock. All of them were dissatisfied. Coincidentally, when they were on the road together, they met and communicated with each other. After discussing for a while, they took the initiative to come together. I've already found out where he will go next. Looks like our destination is the same. The places where Chinyu would occasionally stay had already been noticed by some people. Chapter 996. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. We're here to challenge you. How about it? Do you dare to accept our challenge? These people boasted shamelessly as soon as they appeared. They had originally gathered together to break the legend of Dawn's mountain treasures. However, these people had come a bad time. They were at the bottom of the city in the sky. Chinyu had not refined the drop of essence blood to increase his strength. However, his strength could not be underestimated. He had surpassed most people. Among these people, most of them were close to Senzin's level. There was even one who was slightly higher. However, these people were no match for him. If they really fought, he would win without a doubt. No one could defeat them. These people were not even qualified to be his opponent. None of you could defeat me. If you insist on being stubborn, there will only be one outcome. Chinyu calmly stated this fact. However, the weak could not accept this fact. They felt that they were not weak and had great confidence in themselves. After looking at them one by one, they felt even more confident. Even if they seemed to be evenly matched, so what? Even if they felt that Zhongyu was very strong, there were still several of them. Even if they did not succeed in the final challenge, they would not be threatened. All of them felt even more confident. Without saying anything, they sent out their weapons. One of the female cultivators took out a deep water drum. It was also the most powerful weapon among all of them. Once it was beaten, it would produce a buzzing sound that caused people's minds to be in chaos. The sound seemed to materialize and turn into a sharp attack. It easily caused a commotion in the surroundings. The others were also slightly more vigilant. It seemed that many of them were extremely powerful. As expected, no one could be underestimated. However, their goal was the same. They were going to find the recently famous Dawn Immortal Lord and fight for a name for themselves. This time, they would definitely become famous. This was also the purpose of their visit this time. Sora Shinran had just finished packing and returned when he saw this scene. He often stayed in the city on the clouds. However, this time, more than half of the city on the clouds had been destroyed. Now, he did not have the mood to rebuild it. He could only simply pack up his things and bring along some things that he originally wanted to carry with him. Then he set off with Chinyu. However, he had only been gone for a short while, and when he returned, there were already a few more people he did not know. Furthermore, they looked like they were coming in a menacing manner. They didn't seem friendly at all. Since when did such an existence dare to be so arrogant in front of him? Moreover, none of them recognized themselves clearly, nor did they recognize who their opponents were. To think that he would shamelessly challenge them just for the sake of fame and fortune. The aura of the Azure Sea Divine Dragon made the challengers feel extreme fear. Chinyu often did not deliberately release his aura, nor did he target anyone. However, this time, Sora Shinran was not used to these people who had suddenly appeared. Because they were an eyesore, he naturally wouldn't give them any special treatment. That powerful pressure pressed down on them, causing them to feel extremely pressured. Not everyone could withstand the pressure as easily as Chinyu. From the beginning to the end, his expression did not change. The weakest among these people bent down on the spot and could not straighten up. The others were also sweating profusely. They were thinking about the background of this Shinran who had suddenly appeared. Then they heard Shinran spit out 2 words. He actually called Chinyu Master. Do you want me to take care of all these guys? These people were all ants to him. He wouldn't care too much when they had nothing to do with him. But now that they had appeared in front of him, they were somewhat related to him. If he didn't like them, he would just destroy them. Anyway, the world was big. In this wind realm, he had always been the biggest. If he wanted to take someone's life, it would be easy. There was no need to explain to anyone. There was no need to tell anyone. He would just do it directly. Although his voice was faint and did not carry much emotion. However, this was a challenge. Every single one of them was powerful, and they could keenly sense that death was imminent. They were so scared that they pissed their pants. They desperately broke free from this non-fatal pressure. They ran as fast as they could and quickly ran far away. If they didn't leave now, when would they leave? If they didn't leave now, they were afraid that all of them would have to stay here for a long time. Their strength is not as good as mine. I don't need you to take action. Chinyu didn't want more of these people, since they were far inferior to him. Why should he put them in his eyes? He wasn't even prepared to accept the challenge, because these people were not qualified to be his opponent. There were only 1 or 2 people in the entire Wind Realm who were qualified to be his opponent. The others were not qualified at all. Even if they were his opponent, he wouldn't take them seriously, not to mention accepting any challenge. But those people couldn't even wait for this. As soon as Sora Shinran appeared, they were so scared that they pissed their pants and ran away. Their figures were extremely miserable. But now they couldn't care about anything. They just hoped that they wouldn't die here. After they ran away, they were still a little frightened. Thinking of that extremely powerful power, they couldn't help but shiver. What kind of luck did they have to be able to escape and scathe from the hands of such an expert? If it were anyone else, they probably wouldn't be able to do this. But now they did it. They couldn't help but feel a little surprised. It turns out that the legendary Dawn Immortal Lord is already at that level. That's right. With this kind of strength, he can be called a Divine Lord, let alone an Immortal Lord. Although it's a little exaggerated, as long as you think of the fear at that time, You also feel that he could be called a divine lord. The few of them looked at each other, and without saying anything, they dispersed. If they didn't run now, when would they run? Of course, they ran as far as they could. From then on, they would never come back. It was even more impossible for them to come here and have any interaction with the other party. Of course, in order to avoid exposing themselves, they made up their minds to flatter such a powerful person. And it would be best to smear their image and say that they had eyes but failed to recognize Mount Tai. This way, they could avoid a lot of trouble. As for face and whatnot, what was the use of that? Living well was the best thing to do. To be able to meet such a powerful existence was a kind of honor for them. It would also be something to talk about in the future, at least among those of the same level and strength. Whoever wanted to know the true face of such an existence would have to come and ask them. Chapter 997. The refinement failed. Chinyu withdrew his hand without much surprise. The fact that the Blue Sun Divine Dragon had handed over his essence blood so easily was indeed a surprise to him. Now that the refinement failed, it lessened his surprise by quite a bit. As expected, there was still a prerequisite. Otherwise, how could a divine dragon of his generation hand over everything so easily? And there were no additional conditions. Sora Shinran remembered that he had been beaten up before and immediately left Kanshui Shinran. He was a little further away. He did not insist on doing all of this. However, he indeed had a matter that he wanted Chinyu to help him with. But now he wasn't too sure about Chinyu's character, so he specially set up a restriction. Without his permission, he didn't volunteer this drop of essence blood. There is absolutely no possibility of it being refined by anyone. Of course, he was already sincere enough to take it out, and it wasn't considered cheating or anything. You have seen the current state of the Wind Realm. It has suffered a lot. I have always hoped to see this place become more prosperous, but not only did I not see it, but I also saw a gloomy atmosphere. I saw the vitality and strength I wanted to see the most in you. If you can make the entire Wind Realm very lively within a month, it will get better and better. Even if I have to take the initiative to submit, even if I have to suffer a lot for it, so what? I am willing. Chinyu was already waiting for Shinran's test. Of course, he could forcefully interrupt it, but now the other party had shown his sincerity. And this request really wasn't a troublesome thing, in his opinion. The reason why the Wind Realm was like this now was because of the gloomy atmosphere. There was no vitality in the family, and it was only because the family was deeply rooted. More and more families became very powerful. Of course, at the same time, there were also many emerging experts. There were no opportunities to stand out. Many talented people died prematurely because they didn't have the protection of their families and didn't have status. Only the geniuses in the families could be protected. But how many people could be nurtured like this? Of course, this was a very stable situation, because this way, there wouldn't be any collapse. It would be like the previous immortal world, where there were many large sections. There was chaos everywhere, and it wasn't any better. Although there were many possibilities, many hopes. But at the same time, it was easier for them to collapse, because there were too many scheming matters. Although there weren't many people who had the opportunity to stand out in the face of such a dominant family, the current situation didn't give many people a chance to stand out. However, for most people, this would allow them to receive even more protection. There were no experts wreaking havoc, nor were there any bad guys wreaking havoc. But after all, he wasn't in a hurry. It would be better if he could improve it. However, for Shino, he had not interfered in these matters for many years. As a result, it wasn't easy for him to interfere. Whenever he interfered, there would definitely be some pressure. If he were to do it himself, there would be very few people who would be willing to do as he wished. This test was difficult and not easy at all. However, it wasn't difficult to do it again. Of course, it wasn't that difficult for others. However, to Chinyu, this matter was merely a matter of a few words from him. However, it would still take some time for the message to reach them. It would take 2 or 3 days for the results to be received. However, It wouldn't take a month no matter what. To him, changing the world was just a matter of a few words. 3 days. After 3 days, you'll leave with me. Sora Shinron didn't have time to react. When he figured it out, he couldn't help but be surprised. Originally, he even knew very well. Not many people would be willing to help him do this. But now, not only did he see someone agree, but this person also shortened the time by so much. He clearly gave a deadline of 1 month, but Chinyu said 3 days. What could be done in 3 days? What could he possibly do in 3 days? Even he knew very well that there was nothing he could do in 3 days. The only thing he could do was to run around. If his strength was slightly weaker, 3 days wouldn't even be enough to cover the time spent on the road. How could this be? Since you promised, you must do it. If you can't do it, I will never admit it. When the time comes, no one will be able to persuade me. Even if you let Kanshui Shinron defeat me, I won't go with you. Of course, Chinyu's aura was extremely broad, and he stood there looking extremely magnificent. It inexplicably made people believe that he must have absolute confidence in what he said. Even Sora Shinron couldn't help but have such a feeling, but then he fell on his head. Maybe he was wrong. How could he be so easily influenced? But if it was Chinyu, he might really be able to do this. After all, he was so confident. Since I said it, then I will definitely be able to do it, whether you believe it or not. After 3 days, there will definitely be a result. At that time, you just need to see it with your own eyes. Sora Shinron was also waiting to see. Of course, he slowly shrank his body size. It transformed into an extremely inconspicuous little creature, about the size of a flying insect. He followed behind. Even if Chinyu knew, he didn't care much. His goal was very clear. He went directly to the Sidhu family to find Sidhu Hua. Now in this wind realm, Sidhu Hua still had a very high voice. After all, he was the current patriarch of the Sidhu family. If there was any reform, it would be much easier to start with the Sidhu family. No one could easily erase the status of the Sidhu family, even if a lot of things happened a while ago. But as long as he was here, the 4 great elders were not as capable as him alone. Sidhu Hua was extremely excited about Chinyu's return. But after hearing about this matter, he was a little confused. What was it to make the entire wind realm become refreshed and prosperous? But he didn't refuse and nodded in agreement. It was just that it would be a little complicated to do. Even if the Sidhu family had an extremely high voice in the entire wind realm. But after all, he was the newly appointed patriarch and didn't have any absolute power in his hands. Just do as I say. Chinyu methodically arranged. First, he promoted capable people. He promoted those with outstanding talent. He went to various places where there were no families to promote and gather geniuses. As long as they had a little talent, they could be roped in. Of course, the internal structure had to be slightly changed. Only those with good talent had the qualifications to be promoted and could get the best treatment. Chapter 998. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Bloodline was respected. Identity was the most important thing in the future. All of this would be in the past. From now on, there would be no such rule. Although Sidhu Hua felt a little confused, he still gave the order resolutely. Naturally, there were many people who were not convinced. But for those who had already achieved something, there was naturally some appeasement. It was slightly easier to appease them, but the expenses were bound to be huge. If they're not convinced, just beat them. They know their own ability. Whose talent is the most worthy of nurturing? I think everyone could see it clearly. The reason why there was such a model before was nothing more than a son being valued by his father or a son being valued by his mother. In his opinion, such a method was really rotten, but it was not without any advantages. But if he wanted to start the reorganization now, not only could he not use too violent means, he could not completely listen to these people's opinions. Now, using the fastest speed to cut the Gordian knot was already the best. The entire Sidhu family had many complaints, but the implementation was still very fast. After all, Chinyu used the fastest speed to organize everyone to be obedient. The fate of the four great elders was still vivid in their minds. If they were not obedient, then they would definitely not end up better than the four great elders. After all, with the lesson of the past, it was easier to be obedient. But this reorganization, most people still had the mentality of watching a joke. The current model had been in the wind domain for so many years. Each great family led the way and supported their own outstanding disciples. Where would they get so many resources to nurture people from outside? Even the renowned Situ clan did not have so many resources in their hands that could be used by so many people. If they used the resources to nurture people from outside, no one knew whether they would nurture a group of ingrates or not. After all, it was more reliable to nurture their own people. After all, there was bloodline there. No matter what, the family's interests would always remain unchanged. It was always much better than those outsiders. If the family property was snatched away by outsiders, they would have nowhere to cry. But no one dared to say these words to Chinyu. Even if they were accidentally overheard, their faces would still turn pale with fright. However, Chinyu remembered the 3-day deadline. Since he mentioned it, then he must have absolute confidence to be able to make the entire Wind Realm flourish within 3 days. Since he had already boasted, how could he not do it? Is there anything I can help you with? Shualan was eager to give a try. After all, they were going to reorganize an entire immortal realm in 3 days. Although she couldn't see anything now, she had absolute confidence in Chinyu. Since he had said it, he would definitely do it. Shualan didn't care about what other people were saying. If there was anything she could do, she would do her best. It just so happened that Chinyu had something for Shualan to do. This matter needed to be handled by a meticulous person. If it was someone else, there might be a lot of tricks. If he was accidentally bought over, or if he wasn't absolutely trustworthy, it would be troublesome. Therefore, he had to find a trustworthy person for this matter. And this person had better be meticulous enough. In his eyes, no one was more suitable than Shualan. Moreover, this matter wasn't troublesome. It was just a further screening of the geniuses that had been selected. This time, it was mainly to screen out those with good character. It was also to screen out some of the swindlers. After all, no one could guarantee that with so many places recruiting people at the same time, there wouldn't be some crooked people planted in. Even if it was just a slight flaw in character, it couldn't be tolerated. I will definitely help you with this matter. Shualan did as she said. Chinyu stopped her with a smile. With a flash of his hand, a few small puppets appeared. These small puppets were the same ones that Situ Sheng had used before, but they had some improvements. It could let the master feel everything that the puppets felt. It was extremely magical. It was similar to a clone, but it didn't have much strength. This matter was destined to be a little complicated. There was no need for Shualan to do it herself. She could just use these small clones to do it slowly. With this, it would save a lot of trouble, and some things would be much easier to do. Shualan was slightly surprised. In this way, things that weren't that troublesome to begin with would be much easier to do. Chinyu went with her not because he was worried, but because the other places had already been arranged. This was the most important place. It didn't matter if he showed up or not. But after all, he had nothing to do, so he came over to take a look. Unexpectedly, Situ Hua was also here. It seemed that he was also quite serious about the selection. Seeing this scene, he didn't have any doubts. He just smiled faintly. He had already expected this. It seemed that Situ Hua wasn't an absolute idiot. At least, other than being easily deceived and simple-minded, everything else was considered good. Now that he had recruited a group of talented people from outside, the probability was relatively low. But if he cast a wide net, it wasn't impossible to find some peerless geniuses. The most important thing was that with this method, it was easy to take in a group of trusted subordinates who didn't have any background but were loyal enough. For Situ Hua, who didn't have any foundation at the moment, there was nothing better for him than this. This was the most suitable method for him. It could allow him to gain a foothold in a short period of time. If he didn't know this and couldn't see through this, he would still be able to gain benefits later. After all, Chinyu wanted to use him to do all this. He would definitely not treat them unfairly. If he could achieve his goal, he wouldn't let others gain nothing. If Sidu Hua could see clearly, he would give him a higher opinion. If not, he wouldn't care anymore. This person could only be said to be difficult to get along with. He also had no future, so he didn't need to take in a heart. Now this was also good. Row after row, the little fellows who were selected for cultivation and had good talent were already here. But after all, they didn't have much experience since they were young. They could only learn carelessly. Even if their talent was good, there weren't many who were strong enough. But there was a little boy with a slightly arrogant expression who was particularly outstanding. His cultivation had already reached the Xian immortal realm. Looking at his age, he was only 17 or 18, but he already had such a cultivation. It could be said that he was extremely talented. But with such a cultivation, it meant that he definitely wasn't completely without the protection of some force. He should be from some small family. Chapter 999. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. An outstanding disciple was particularly eye-catching. At this moment, many people were ready to make a move. Most of them wanted to pull this disciple under their command. However, Chinyu could not help but shake his head when he saw this. He could not accept this person. He must be an ungrateful wretch. He had such a high cultivation and talent. One could imagine that if he did not have a strong background, he would be the center of attention of the entire family. He would be the focus of nurturing. However, he could stand here and accept the Sidhu family selection so calmly. One could imagine that he was using the previous place as a springboard. He wanted to come to a bigger place and continue to be valued. However, what about the resources that the previous people had invested in him? Could they write it off completely? Was he going to say that he was deeply grateful? Was he going to be wild with joy? Would they hand over the most talented young talent that they had painstakingly nurtured over a long period of time in fear and trepidation? Moreover, they did not want to receive any remuneration? What a joke. Any smart person would not do such a thing. One could imagine that this little guy was not someone who knew his place. His expression was too calm. His talent had become his capital to be proud of. Xuelan and Chinyu had the same thought. However, Sidhu Hua had not thought of this. He just could not help but want to snatch this talent and recruit him. Chinyu suddenly said the first thing he said since he arrived. "You're eliminated. Get out." The handsome young man's face collapsed in an instant, and a hint of forbearance appeared on his face. After all, he was used to having things go smoothly. He knew that this was not a place where he could behave atrociously. However, he still retorted unwillingly. "Who are you? Why did you eliminate me? Can't you see that I have the best talent among all of you? I have such a high cultivation at such a young age. I will definitely have a bright future." Sidhu Hua had some doubts at first. However, when he heard this little guy's words, his heart turned cold. He was so arrogant and proud that he did not put anyone in his eyes. Even he now knew why this little guy could not be recruited, because he was not someone who was content with his lot. People like him should either be eliminated early on or be treated well. But this guy didn't have a good background at all, so there was no need for him to endure. There's no reason. It's just that you're too ungrateful. Don't tell me you picked up your cultivation for nothing and the high-grade magic treasures you're wearing. Could it be that you casually picked them up from the mountain? After all, there were many young people present who didn't come from very high backgrounds. After hearing this, they couldn't help but roar with laughter. They didn't know what had happened, but that didn't stop them from laughing. What an interesting remark. If he could pick up a high-grade magic treasure in mountains, he could pick up a heavenly treasure that could improve his cultivation. In that case, everyone might as well hide in the mountains. But in reality, there was only danger in the mountains. How could there be so many natural treasures? Even if there was a fortuitous encounter, it was not something that they could casually go out and explore at their age. He really thought of himself as the illegitimate child of the heavenly Tao. He dared to venture into the mountains without any regard for his life, hoping that countless treasures would fall from the sky. The one with the highest strength was easily eliminated. Then came the normal screening. Those with bad character couldn't do it. Those with fake identities and backgrounds couldn't do it either. It didn't matter if they came from a bad background. What mattered was integrity. Later on, some people found out about this. If they had difficulties, they would quickly reveal their difficulties in hiding part of the true information. If they had no difficulties, they could only beg the heavens and slowly pray that they wouldn't be discovered. But praying didn't have any effect at all. No one could escape. With the combined efforts of Qin Yu and Xuelon, they could find out what was wrong with this group of children at a glance. If they weren't strong enough, it didn't matter. Strength was never the only criterion to judge a person. The most important thing was the person's character and whether he knew how to repay kindness. Situ Hua was happy to see this and occasionally picked up a few advantages from behind. When he saw children that he liked, he directly took them in. In a short while, more than a dozen children followed behind him. Most of the day had passed. However, with the success of the first round, the second day seemed easier. At the end of the first day, a few little fellows with slightly questionable backgrounds joined the team. There was a problem with their identities and origins, but they also seemed to be clueless about it. Just like a real child, his status had become a little more miserable. They didn't have the protection of any family and didn't come from a small family. But because their talents were outstanding and they were also the sons of hunters on the mountain, they were singled out. They seemed to have an honest and kind personality. In addition, because of their outstanding talents, they were directly selected. Just like that, a day passed slowly. But still, few people understood why this was done. Was it just to recruit people? But that didn't seem right. Such a big lineup didn't seem like it was just to recruit people. This was because such activities were taking place as far as the Sidhu clan was able to reach. Outstanding children were being selected everywhere. Those geniuses were being selected, and it seemed like they wanted to catch all of them in one fell swoop. A pair of hunter siblings who were later selected secretly spread the news to the outside world. Qin Yu didn't say anything when he found out. All of this was within his expectations. How could it be possible for only the Sidhu family to take action? At the very least, he had to let everyone else be involved. Only in this way could he achieve the desired effect. Will they really do what we think and start immediately? Qin Yu was very sure. As long as the big and small families thought that they had guessed the truth, they would all follow suit. But Xuelon didn't know why there was such a possibility. After all, it seemed that the big families weren't easy to deal with. All of them were extremely cautious. She shouldn't have acted so directly without any precautions. She should have imitated him. After all, 3 days was a little short. If there was really a month. No, even if it was half a month, it was much better than the 3 days he spent in the past 3 days. 3 days was too short. There weren't any results on the first day, but some secret arrangements were already in place. Just wait and see. Everything will go according to plan. There won't be any accidents. Xuelon suppressed the curiosity in her heart. Anyway, the final result would be seen in 2 days. There was no need to rush. Chapter 1000. After all, it was the #1 clan that caused such a big commotion. The other clans that were ranked at the bottom also immediately sent people in. Although there was a slight lack of time, and some identities could not be made too realistic, it was enough. But it was more or less enough. If he arranged a few more people, someone would eventually be chosen. The facts proved that some of the people they sent were selected. It was not that no one doubted whether there was something fishy about these people being selected, but the results they received were a little shocking. No one had ever promoted people from small clans before. No one cared about those feral children who were born and raised here either. They could not even be considered as clans. How could there be talented children? But the brief list that was sent back in the end made them turn pale with fright. There were actually so many outstanding children that were buried. One could imagine. Soon after, the other clans followed suit. On the last day, the goal was basically achieved. No matter how picky Sora Shenron was, he had to admit. Although everything in front of him had not reached his expectations, it was only a short 3 days after all. If it was longer, it would definitely reach the peak of prosperity. Now, It had completely reached his expectations. But the more satisfied he was with the current situation, the more puzzled he was. Why was there such a big difference? Chinyu did almost nothing, but he could still easily reap all the benefits. He couldn't figure out what was going on, but he could take the initiative to ask if he could not figure it out, so he directly asked. Chinyu smiled. This matter sounded very complicated, but in fact, it was very simple to do. People's hearts are complicated. The main point of this matter was to reform and break the original model so that new talents could be promoted. But this was destined to be a very troublesome matter. However, now that the Siddha clan had taken the lead, they were at the forefront. When the people below received a relatively reasonable explanation, they would follow suit. Of course, it was not that they did not benefit at all. After all, if they followed suit, they could also obtain a huge benefit from this. At the very least, they would have a group of capable subordinates. This was excellent news for the entire Wind domain. So it was not considered a big deal, and it was not considered a trick. All of this was just what they thought. He was only able to read everyone's thoughts. Sora, Shinran didn't understand, but he didn't ask why this time, because he wouldn't get an answer even if he asked. However, this was a very good result for him. That was all he needed to know. As for the rest, it was enough. What's so important about that? Inside the Wind realm, it was thriving. Clans big and small still did not understand why. However, with the first few great families taking the lead, they followed suit one after another. All of a sudden, those with good talent became the hotcakes that everyone fought over. The big clans wanted to get their hands on them, and the small clans did their best to rope them in. Of course, there were also some smaller clans that merged with the larger clans. This was another round of running in. However, the future was extremely bright. After this run-in, one could imagine, countless years later, another group of extremely powerful experts appeared. It must be the group of people who stood out from the crowd this time. On the surface, who was the biggest winner in this matter? It should belong to Siddhu Hua. As the first person to make a move, he had already recruited many people under him, although some of them were spies sent by other clans. However, the people who were really under his control were not in the minority. As for those suspicious ones, he wouldn't foolishly put them in a very important position. However, even if he counted them carefully, there were already a lot of geniuses that he could use. With a little training, these people would be able to achieve great things in the future. Even if some of them died prematurely, as long as he was there, these people would become the sharpest blade in his hand. Toward Chinyu, he was naturally shedding tears of gratitude. However, at this time, he found that the person had suddenly disappeared. Just like in the beginning, he suddenly appeared and disappeared. Siddhu Hua was very clear about such an existence. He was just a passerby in the other party's life. However, that was already an extremely great honor. At least for him, he gained a lot of benefits from it. This time, is it considered helping each other? I originally prepared a lot of remuneration. Unfortunately, he couldn't find a person now. However, Siddhu Hua was also clear in his heart. In Chinyu's eyes, the remunerations that he had prepared were truly nothing. Not to mention other things. Chinyu had a lot of things that he had only heard of in rumors. Therefore, although he felt a little regretful, he didn't take it to heart. However, if Chinyu appeared in the Situ clan's territory again, he had to pay special attention to him. He had to be treated as a distinguished guest and coaxed well. That was the person that the entire Situ clan had to treat as a supreme person. Those who knew Chinyu's strength deeply agreed with this. Not to mention how much that person had helped them. His strength was enough. In addition, Siddhu Hua was pushed by him. In the eyes of many people, Siddhu Hua only gave such an order out of gratitude. It was not that excessive. As for the ordinary clan's disciples, they might not even be able to come in contact with that person. Perhaps they might not even be able to see that person in their lifetime. Therefore, this news was only symbolic. It represented the respect of the entire Situ clan. Sora, Shinran looked at the thriving land and finally lowered his head. This time, he was willing to submit. After truly refining that drop of blood essence, Chinyu's strength increased slightly. As he expected, He was stuck at the late stage Saint King. If he wanted to go further, it would be a little troublesome because he would have to go through many tests. When that time came, his reputation would be extremely great. The greater the reputation, the more outstanding his talent. Needless to say, his talent was one that only appeared once in 10,000 years. When he broke through Shenzhen, he had to find an empty place. Otherwise, it would implicate many places and implicate many innocent people. However, he didn't know where the opportunity to break through Shenzhen was. At the moment when his strength increased, Yi Zichen's eyes widened. In a ninefold divine realm, the remaining 7 great Shenron opened their eyes one after another. They looked at the void without any focus in their eyes. Soon, they slowly retracted their gazes. As for what they were thinking in their hearts, only they themselves knew. If there was only one Shenron, it would be fine. However, 2 Shenrons recognized one person as their master at the same time. This kind of thing had never happened before. Chapter 1001. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless fantasy translation laughter could be heard everywhere, and the fragrance of flowers and trees could be smelled. Countless young children were wantonly rolling on the grass. Occasionally, they would run into some poisonous grass without any hindrance. Their laughter was like silver bells. As he ran, he didn't know how far he had run. He ran deep into the mountains. However, the woman sitting by the river was not worried at all. Instead, she looked at the children lovingly as they ran further and further away. Even though she knew that there were countless dangers there, she was not worried at all. As the children ran, the small balls in their hands fell to the ground. They all bet that whoever got the ball first would win. However, before they could get their hands on the ball, a black door suddenly appeared at the spot where the ball landed. 2 figures stepped out from the door, and the door suddenly disappeared. When the children saw who it was, they were stunned for a moment. Then they grabbed a handful of soil and wanted to throw it over. It's him. I remember too. My memory is the best. Even Grandpa Village Chief praised me. I definitely won't be wrong. Hurry up and beat him to death. A child said cruel words in the most innocent tone. However, they did not feel that they had done anything wrong. Qin Yu had just arrived at this place when he heard these words. Seeing that they were 3 young children, he was prepared to ignore them. However, there was no end to the soil, although they could not get within 3 inches of him. These children were not afraid at all. They even dared to run around in this deep mountain forest. That was a little too daring. The 3 children suddenly felt a sense of pressure. Finally, he realized that he was a little scared. They threw away everything in their hands and ran away. As they ran, they shouted that the great demon king was here. The big bad guy was here. Shualon burst out laughing. Qin Yu shook his head helplessly. Did he really look like the great demon king and the big bad guy? He had done a lot of things. Not to mention that he had eliminated evil and promoted good. But he had been respectfully called the Dawn Immortal. He had just arrived in this new world, and he had been beaten up into a big bad guy. However, laughter was laughter. At first, he thought that this was just a small interlude. However, when he stood at a place with signs of human habitation, at the first moment when everyone saw Qin Yu, they were all shocked. They picked up everything they could and attacked. Although these people were just ordinary people and did not have any abilities. But the feeling of being shunned by everyone was really not a good feeling. Something was wrong here. The wood world seemed to be full of flowers and birds. It was very quiet and peaceful. However, because it was too quiet, it gave him some misconceptions. As if this was not a beautiful place, but a huge prison, maintaining a beautiful appearance. These people, if he said that he had mistaken her for someone else, that would be fine. He could just clear up the misunderstanding later. However, what if they did not recognize him? Even though he has never been here before, everything is possible. Qin Yu will not let go of any conjecture. After eliminating everything else, there was only one possibility left. No matter how impossible it was still the truth. Even if he hadn't been here before, there were many powerful figures in the world. If he had used some method to cross paths with him before, and even form a grudge with him, then that was to be expected. If someone from sect in the immortal world had some connection with the wood world, so much so that someone recognized him here. Everyone knew him. However, Chinyu had a vague feeling that things were not that simple. Just by looking at the attitude of those ordinary people, he could tell that they were definitely not well-intentioned. Their attitude was more like true fear. Rather than saying that it was fear, it was slightly inappropriate. That feeling was more like disgust, and it also carried killing intent. Although he had never been here before, he had never interacted with the people here. However, his intuition would never be wrong. Shualan's expression also became more serious. She felt it carefully and found that it was really as Chinyu had said. These people definitely did not just know them. It was not just vigilance against strangers. They really wanted to kill them, and their killing intent was extremely strong. Not long after, a truly powerful person was suddenly attracted. However, this person's strength was only at the immortal spirit realm. For the current Chinyu, he was just a small ant that could be dealt with a wave of his hand. However, it was this insignificant ant who, upon seeing him, sent him a message without any explanation. It attracted more followers. This person seemed to know something. Chinyu was also a little impatient. Anyone who had just arrived at a new place and found that the people here regarded him as an enemy, he would feel a little unhappy. Moreover, he did not do anything, and there was no need for him to receive such treatment. You know me, and as if you're facing a great enemy. Who sent you? Every sentence Chinyu said was a narrative, and every sentence made people not dare to resist. That person's strength was really much lower than his. Even if his mind was firm, under pressure, he blurted out without thinking. He was a follower of Shinmuism, and his strength was not bad. He was a 7th grade follower. However, after blurting out this, he gradually reacted and was unwilling to say anything more. Instead, he showed some arrogance. It was as if he had never seen a real battle before. Therefore, he had no concept of death. Although he could feel danger because he had no concept of it, he was particularly bold. He did not seem like someone who had really seen a life and death battle. You better let go of me quickly. Shinmuism is not something you can easily fight against. No matter how strong you are, can you be stronger than Lord Shenron? Shinmuism was created by Lord Kyuki Shenron for the stability of this world. No one can destroy this stability, because Lord Shenron will always protect us. This person even wanted to self-destruct, but Chinyu directly snapped his throat before he could do so. These people were simply crazy. Moreover, Shenron took the initiative to establish a sect here and monopolize it. This was something that had never happened in other places. The other two, Shenron, secretly transmitted their voices to Chinyu. This was indeed an extremely special place. Although they rarely interfered, once they did, it would shock the world and make ghosts and gods cry. No one could stop them. Kyuki Shenron felt that no one could do it well. In the end, he decided to do it himself, to maintain the peace of this world. However, it seemed a little strange now, but no one could tell what was strange. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.